2020 has certainly been a very wild ride, but we couldn't be any more excited about the great things to come in 2021. So to count down to the new year, we've compiled our top 10 VINwiki car stories from 2020, and here they are.
The first story happened a couple of months ago, and this one I'm kind of embarrassed to say. We were up at a nice restaurant. It was definitely a 5-star restaurant, and our valet, he was a little presumptuous to not lock the key box, which is what we speak about in all our other stories. Make sure you lock the key box. But this one, it wasn't a lot he was familiar with, so he didn't know the code, so he didn't lock the key box, which is completely his fault. But yes, I assume the responsibility. So what happened while he was parking cars throughout the night? Someone inadvertently got into the box, obviously. I happened to be over at my mother's house, which was not too far, probably 10 minutes away from this restaurant. I get a phone call. Hey, Alex, we lost a set of BMW keys. I said, well, look around thoroughly. They're probably in another car. Sometimes that's what happens. I said, ask the customer also. They may have a spare key or something like that. And if they have a spare key, we can run them home, get the car, bring it back or something like that. He calls me back 10 minutes later. We have a second set of keys missing. It's a Volvo. I said, whoa, that's strange. We usually don't lose 2 sets of keys in the night. I said, all right, ask them the same thing. Keep me posted. We got a third call. It was a Cadillac. I'm like, I'm on my way. This is something serious going on here. Shut down the parking lot and kind of protect everything because something's going on. As I'm driving over to the restaurant, which is about 10 minutes away, I get a 4th call. And this time it's from the manager of the restaurant. There's a 4th key missing, which was a Lexus. So I get there and there's 4 keys have been stolen out of the key box without the valet knowing. The manager goes inside and he's checking a video. And yes, he sees a group of kids pull up in an Acura TL and snatch the keys when the valet's not looking. Completely our fault. So for us, we're crisis control right now. My number one thing is let's block these cars in. So if they do get access to the cars, they can't get these cars out of the parking lot. Number 2, let me get these people home. There are now probably 8 people standing around trying to leave, but they can't because we have their keys are missing. So we drive the people home, Uber some home, some have 2 cars so they're able to get home, and we get these spare keys and we get these cars taken away. But one of the cars was a Cadillac SRX, I believe, the small SUV. That one was a rental car, so the guy didn't have access to the key. Not only that, when I go look at the car, I notice that the license plate is bent up. Here in Atlanta, we have license plate readers all up and down the freeway. So in this particular case, this criminal bent the license plate up so when he's driving down the freeway, the cops won't recognize the license plates, which tell the police which direction the car is going. So we knew this was a serious situation. So we have to replace these keys. I start getting invoices in the office. The BMW, our cost $456. The Volvo, not that bad. I think it was $300 or $400. The Cadillac, lost key to the rental car, I think it was $250 plus a tow fee. And the surprise was a Lexus LS430 2010. And that key was $500, almost $562 for a 10-year-old Lexus key. So that was a lot. That was, with everything said and done, it was close to $2,000 in lost keys. So what I ended up doing, I ended up going back to the parking lot and putting a simplex lock on there so the valets wouldn't have an issue with getting this key box open. And while I was there, another set of criminals came in. And how do I know they were criminals? There were 4 deep in a car and at a 5-star restaurant that, these guys were young. They were under 20 years old and this restaurant doesn't fit that. So I stand up, I'm looking at them hard. I get on the phone, I start calling the police. I tell the police, attempted robbery in progress, and they start flying down the freeway to try to apprehend these criminals. They see that I'm on the phone, so they quickly leave out of my lot and go into another lot of an event center that's next door. So I'm like, they're in that lot now, they're just looking for trouble, you can just tell. So the cops come off the freeway, and with their sirens and lights going, these guys picked up that it was probably coming for them, so they left out of the parking lot really quickly. So they leave out of the parking lot, they get onto the main road and start flying down the road in one direction. The cops start chasing them, they make a U-turn, turn off their lights, and come back in the opposite direction of where we are. So they're coming back towards us, and then they get on, which is in Alpharetta, the 400 freeway, and go 400 southbound with their lights off. But before getting on the freeway, they clipped another car, which means they hit their bumper, didn't do any serious damage, and as the police are chasing them, and they just shot down the freeway. Now, the problem here in Alpharetta, they have a no chase policy, so they were only able to go one exit before they had to let off the chase. But the police ended up coming back to the restaurant. I thanked them profusely for helping out tremendously and just trying to give their best effort. They thanked us for calling and just trying to give them as much information as possible. But we've never heard anything since. So as we're sitting there going over everything, one of the officers comes up to me and he's like, "Can I talk to you? I know who you are." And I'm really nervous at this point because I'm like, uh-oh. But his name was Officer John Goodman, and he says, "I recognize you from the VINwiki channels." So he's like, "I know Ed. I've actually helped Ed out. There was a case of a traffic incident that he helped out a couple of weeks or a month ago, but it was pretty funny." But I actually got nervous for a second when the officer's like, "I know who you are." We had a private party, and I like to pop up on private parties. Typically what we do with our company, we schedule parties, and the valets are scheduled to be there at a certain time, certain location, or anything like that. But usually if they don't see my name on the party, they think it's a smaller party and something like that. So what I did, I actually popped up on a party because I like to thank the customers, see how they're doing, make sure the event's straight and everything like that. But this time, also, I knew two particular valets were late all the time. And I wanted to see what time exactly they got there because they would lie on their timesheets quite a bit. So what I did, I just went there and waited for them to show up. Of course, they show up late, but not only were they late, I could not understand how, but there's this term called hotboxing. This car was filled with smoke from top to bottom. These guys were high as whatever coming to work. Needless to say, these individuals got fired, and I ended up just working a shift, but there's no way. I would be stupid to think that valets don't smoke here or do drink and all this stuff, but you cannot do it before coming into work. This is just obviously the dumbest thing to do in the world. And yes, we are going to fire you. We're not going to play that game. You don't even have to drug test you at this point because it's obvious if your eyes are bloodshot red that you're high, and that's just not going to happen in our field. The next story is actually tied into that a little bit. I get a call one day, and the valet states, "Alex, you have to see this. I'm about to send you a text message of what's in this box." So I look at it and I said, "What is that?" And it's a little blue packet that looks like it has residue in it. He says, "It looks like drugs." So I said, "Obviously." I'm like, "Sniff it, see what it is." He didn't think that was funny, but obviously I'm like isolated to the side. Let me see what's going on. So it took me about an hour. I get over to the parking lot, and yes, it definitely looks like drugs. Obviously I didn't have it tested, but the bigger concern is who left it there. Was it the valet from the night before? Was it a customer from the night before? It could have been anything. The valet picked it up, threw it in a box. I want to give him benefit of the doubt. But at the same time, I'm very cautious. I don't need valets that are high out in the field parking $100,000 cars. It's already enough that they're 21 years old. I don't need that as an added charge on top of everything else. So what we did, I called the valet into the office. I was very straight up with him. I told him what happened, what I found, and what I felt the problems could be. So I asked him straight up, was it his? He said, "No, absolutely not." I said, "Well, where did it come from?" He said he didn't know. If he did pick it up from another customer, fine, you would say that, you admit that, but overnight it didn't just magically come into our key box. So I asked him to drug test, to do a voluntary drug test, and he said no, and he refused to, and essentially quit. So we pretty much know what the answer was, but we have to eliminate that completely from our company. We cannot play around with that, especially me knowing that I have valets out in the field we can't have valets high out in the field. I'm really protective of that. Whatever you do on your personal time, that's fine, but please don't affect the company or the job of your coworkers. Now, this email was funny. I received an email saying they had a wonderful time at the restaurant. Everything was great, except when they got in their car, the valet had clearly farted in their car. How can I even fight that? How can I even address that? Was it body odor? Was it this? Or did he really have gas? I can't even say that. What do I tell my valet? Don't fart in customers' cars? It's very unfortunate. I'm sorry. She actually laughed about it and giggled about it a little bit, but she said she actually gave him $20. So I paid him $20 to fart in my car. Now, this one account that we had parking, but it was underground. And They wanted us there as soon as they were able to get their permit to open up the doors, but they were still doing construction. So we were able to take this Mazda Miata, I think it was an NA1, so first generation Miata, down the parking deck, but there was still construction. So there was sometimes we're running over nails, which we don't like doing. But this one day, we ran over a bolt. And what I mean by a bolt, a 7-inch bolt went through the tire, punctured through the rim, and obviously caused it to go flat. The Valet was lucky because the tire was such a low profile tire that it didn't lose control. I believe if it was a big 70 series tire and he punctured through all of that, he would have kind of rolled and hit the wall as he was going down. But this one, it only went through, so it just kind of flathered and he felt it and he was able to still control it into a parking space, but he couldn't believe it. Of course, it's our fault. The customer's upset with us and he wants us to pay for it. The rim was only a couple $100, but then we had to get the tire. But I said, you know what? I'm keeping this wheel. So this wheel is on the wall in my garage right now. It is known with all of my valet attendants, if I personally am able to steal a car out of your parking lot without you knowing, you're immediately fired. Sometimes I give them benefit of doubt, but I really try to sneak in and get these cars out of the lot. Test them. So all the time they're looking over their shoulders thinking, is Alex coming? Is this coming? Is that coming? So what I did, I rode up on my motorcycle this day. And they didn't notice. And what I see is a Mercedes GL 500, 550, maybe a 450, but overall it's a $60,000 truck and the windows rolled down. I'm a little upset about that, so with my helmet on, I parked the motorcycle in the back and walk up to the car. They don't try to stop me. I don't even think they see me. I notice a bright orange lanyard attached to Mercedes keys. I have time to take a picture of this. Boom. I look at the distance. The valets are at least 60 feet away. I take a picture of that. I get in the car with the helmet on and drive away. I drive away for a little while, probably come back in the parking lot 2, 3, 4 minutes later. I have my helmet off at this time. The valets are like, oh, when'd you get this new Mercedes? I didn't get this new Mercedes. I just stole it out of your parking lot. I would have been okay if they were apologetic. Yes, Alex, we made a mistake, but they wanted to get defensive. And that doesn't do well with me when I just stole a vehicle out of your parking lot. So they wanted to be so defensive that they both had to be terminated because they didn't really see the problem that they had leaving a Mercedes GL with the keys on the front seat with the window rolled down in downtown Atlanta. So luckily I was able to steal the car and not someone else. So a lot of times customers ask us, what's an average tip? An average tip is, it all depends on the car. At the minimum, I would say $2 per vehicle. But obviously realize these are college students that are working for you, running to get their cars, and they usually get paid off their tips only. So the better you can do, the better it is for them. But at the same time, I explain to my attendants, what do you do to deserve more than $2? Do you just come up with an attitude and be like, here, give me your key and let me go park your car? Hey, sir, how'd you enjoy everything? Can you open up the doors, have them waiting for them, have their air going, have their heat going? So these are things that happen when you're a tip. So I try to explain to the valets, this is what you do when you get your tips. So obviously they take the tips, they walk away, then they look at the tip and they're all excited. They got $5, $10, maybe even $20. This one day, valet pulls up a car. I forgot what kind of car it was. Might have been a Mercedes or something like that. Pulls it up, received the tip, didn't look at it immediately, put it in, the customer drives away. After he drives away, counts it, it's $250. He's like, yes! All the valets are excited because at the end of the night, they split the tips and they're just obviously the more money they make, the more money everybody makes. About an hour later, the guy comes back. He realized he gave the valet the wrong pocket. He had $5 in this pocket, $250 in this pocket, and gave the valets $250 instead of the $5. So it's kind of awkward, but how do you ask for your $250 back? And B, is the valet going to be honest? What $250? We didn't see $250. But in actuality, the valet was very honest. He's like, oh, sir, we were excited and everything. So yeah, here's the money. The guy was so impressed with his honesty, he actually did give him $50. So he gave him one of the $50 bills just for being honest. So the valets were still happy. They got $50 off of this car. So, but that's what it pays for being honest. I receive an email from the manager of the restaurant, and he's like, Alex, we have a customer that's very upset. He's emailed the manager, the owner, and corporate about the valet's damaging his Genesis or Hyundai Genesis. It's not the Hyundai Genesis, but it's a Genesis four-door sedan. So I'm like, all right, let me research it. So I contact the customer. I receive the pictures, and the pictures don't look right. He says we slammed it against a wall, but the damage is on the license plate and the emblem of the trunk. So I said, that's weird, but there's no damage on the bumper at all. I said, there's nothing in the parking lot that can create that kind of damage, but nonetheless, let me meet him over at the parking lot and let's see what's going on. But I can't meet him until later on that night. So he's like, I'm just going to go over there on my own. So the customer goes over there and he looks around the parking lot. I say, if you see anything that looks like it could have caused this damage, please let us know. So he looks around completely and he doesn't see anything at all, but he's still insistent that we did it. So I told him and I gave him a suggestion, because I've seen this before. It looks like the trunk was open and he or his wife might have backed out the garage and slid up against the top of the thing. He thought about it, he looked at it, he went home, measured it, and it measured up perfectly. So we get a follow-up email. You are absolutely correct. It did not happen in a parking lot. I'm so sorry, but this guy was accusatory. He was not letting down. How could we employ a company such like this that would do something so deliberate and then try to cover it up? And that really tarnishes our reputation. My guys know, if you get into an accident, let me know. You're not going to get fired. And it's actually better if I can get ahead of this. If I can get ahead of this with the customers and really talk to them and say, hey, you know what, sir, we had an accident. We're upfront about it. They're going to be much more transparent with us, and they're going to be a little bit more opted to let us go to a body shop of our choice. In light of everything going on with the race issues in this country, I think I'd be remiss to say we've been accused of being a racist company, racist against black people. And I didn't say anything. I wanted to hear what this customer had to say. And without getting too political with everything, a white customer called me and said he had a black girlfriend or wife, and the valet purposely did not open an umbrella for her as they exited out of the restaurant while it was raining. Now, this restaurant was kind of a weird setup. Usually you see valet parking that has, you come in at the same place and you leave at the same place. This restaurant didn't have that. You came in this way, but you exited out that way. So what this customer saw when a car came in, he had the umbrella for the lady and he let her inside the restaurant. When he pulled up towards the exit and made her walk all the distance for this black lady, and he was very offended that he didn't offer an umbrella. The valet, who happened to be white, really nice guy, and the irony is, has a black girlfriend, which the guy didn't know, said, sir, you had an umbrella. That's why I figured you were going to walk her to the car, because sometimes people are very chivalrous where they say, no, let me walk my wife to the car. Thank you very much. Here's your tip. But instead, he got very upset, very offended, and thought we were being racist, and called the office to make a point that the valet was being racist, and our company was, in fact, a racist company for not holding an umbrella up, walking her to the car, and making her walk further than the people had just pulled in. So I had to explain everything, but better yet, I said, you know what, sir? Let me meet you at the restaurant. So I meet him at the restaurant, and his jaw dropped when he realized that we were not as racist as he first figured. And then, in fact, I shared with him that the valet who, in fact, did that actually has a black girlfriend. It was a bad misunderstanding. And it was a bad choice that, yes, he should have offered at least to hold the umbrella up to walk her to the car. We never want to be like that for anybody. We employ everybody from black, white, Asian, Muslim, anything. In the world of valet parking, any valet company would be lying to you if they didn't tell you that they love private events. Private events are parties that happen either at someone's home, at an event center, headquarters, something like that. We absolutely love it. So we had this one party for the BET Awards. And with the BET Awards, we'll have all these little parties pop up all throughout Atlanta. And we'll just staff them accordingly. But this one was supposed to be only 200 people. 200 people is easily 4 to 5 valets. They can definitely handle that kind of volume, no problem. I get a call and I'm out to dinner, and Alex, we're out of control. Excuse me? He's like, these cars will not stop coming in. Found out that P. Diddy was there and T.I. and all of these people. The reason the house became so popular, this is a very popular house because it was owned by, if you ever watched The Real Housewives of Atlanta, I think Kim Zolciak, I think her boyfriend, sugar daddy, or whatever it was called, Big Papa, I think it was a house that belonged to him. And the bank now controlled the house, and the bank would actually lease the house out to parties in order to supplement the loss of income until they were able to sell that house. Turns out 200 people was really 2,000 people. And this is in the middle of Buckhead, and they don't have the streets to support that kind of parking. So we have cars all up and down the road. And mind you, I only have 5 or 6 valets working. So even with 20 valets, it would have been a lot of work. But I had to call in an extra team, get them going, get them out there, and just park these cars as much as possible. We had 3 cars, valets in their personal cars, just driving valets to get other cars because it was that far away. It was almost a mile at a point to pick up a car. It was a mess, and secretly we were hoping the police would come in and shut the party down because that's how insane it was. You would think, how do you get 2,000 people into a party, into a house in Buckhead? If you have a 20,000 square foot house with swimming pool and all this sitting on 4 or 5 acres, it can happen. And it did. It was a mess. It was truly a mess. People were driving over the grass, not the valets, but the customers trying to get in to get their cars valeted. It was an out of control mess. And the crazy part is we tried to go back to the billing to get additional hours for the additional valets we had to bring in, and they pretty much skirted us. So I think we lost a couple of $1,000s on that event. So we are very insistent. If you request 5 valets for 200 people, we are parking up to 200. Now, if it's 300 people, we're not going to go crazy. But if we see it's going out of control, we're going to shut down the party from the valet side because we're not going to be liable for millions of dollars worth of cars that we can't control because we only have 10 valets trying to control close to 1,000 cars. That's not going to happen. So that was truly an out of control event, and that's totally insane for us. But we make sure this will not happen again.
I had started planning a solo run about a year ago. A lot of people told me, you need to do this. And it was from people that, I highly respected. And I'm looking at these people, I'm like, oh, you're the man, you're the fastest out there. You're the guy to beat. I had people coming up to me like, Doug says, hey, Fred, when are you going to do your run? What are you going to do it in? Last winter, after he broke the 27-25 record, we actually had dinner for Christmas. And Doug and I talked over his time, and we sat and had talked over it over the last few months. And when we're talking about his time, I told him point blank that realistically, 27-25, I didn't think was beatable by hours. I felt 27-25 was beatable by minutes. I felt Doug and Arne had taken some of the time that was known to be left on the table and basically eliminated that gap. So when we had the discussion, one of the things we basically said was the only way that it would even be beatable by minutes was if somebody just carefree, no care whatsoever. And that's kind of where I balanced my entire run on, is the conversation with Doug, that the only way to get to the next level is you have to start changing things that other people didn't do. Number 1 was the fuel tanks. Number 2 was a car that was as capable or faster than the last car that set the record. And beyond that, you had to take advantage of things like fuel stops. The fuel stop's probably the biggest advantage of the whole entire run. There's nobody that could do this that wouldn't think, not only as, was put in one perspective, bat crazy, but eliminate the stops so you have one stop as adverse to multiple stops. Because as anybody knows, the more stops you make, it drags on and on and on and on, and it brings your average down and down and down and down. That was another perspective. Now, being a solo driver, a lot of people, have asked me, did I put cameras, or did I videotape the run, or who did this or who did that? And I have to tell people, I say, texting and driving's illegal. Can you imagine trying to drive at the speed I was driving and make sure everything was refreshed, make sure your GoPro's running, and make sure all that's going on? Because it's just not realistically possible. You're in a different zip code. Even just having two people, having my brother navigate or having him be able to spot for cops or look the other direction, when you're, passing a car or something, it changes the whole aspect of what the run is really about. So when people, think of different things about, how did you document or how could you document it? I really kind of was limited based on, who I could tell and who I could trust and be able to still maintain my goal. Because if I didn't meet my goal, then the rest of it didn't matter. So after talking to Doug and talking about some of the issues that he had, I decided to, change that up a bit. Basically, it kind of became one of those things that I felt if I didn't do it, I wouldn't just be letting myself down, I'd be letting other people down. When I saw the record fall and we were watching it on Glimpse and stuff, and I was calling them out as they were coming into Portofino, I said, man, these guys did this. They don't have any experience. They didn't pick a good car. If these guys can do it in this, then somebody with experience really could lay a number down. And honestly, I got on the phone with Arne, I got on the phone with Doug. I'm like, hey, you guys need to make this happen. I'll do whatever I can to help you make it happen. I'll drive with you, I'll spot with you. If one of you can't go, I'll go. This needs to come back home. Arne and Doug, both great guys. They're just like me. They have their own thing going on. They know what they want to do. And, lo and behold, I just started planning my own gig. Basically what we started out with in late April was talking to my brother about coming down and doing a run with him and myself. That changed because my brother couldn't get time off work, and as the COVID started going away in our home state, this turned into a solo adventure. And solo adventure meaning that I was going to take the time I had on my hands, as I'd done over the last few months, and start planning and prepping a car to make a solo run from New York to LA, using a vehicle that was capable of a speed that was better than the Audi and was lighter than the Audi, and I could replace the people with fuel. So by replacing the people with fuel tanks, I was going to gain by throwing somebody out of the car like every 3 hours. A lot of people don't understand, gasoline's only like 6.2, 6.3 pounds per gallon. So with approximately 130 gallons added to the car and the seats removed and the spare tire and the jack, the rear interior, the rear seats, everything I could take out of the car to lighten it up, by the time I had weighed the car with myself full of fuel, I was actually within the stock parameters of the GVWR of the car. One of the biggest things was being able to have a car that factory could handle the extra weight, but also would be fast enough, in stock trim. And money-wise, the best way to do that was go to the rental station and rent a car. My buddy dropped me off, and I headed to my friend Ricky Creekmore's and commenced to tearing the car apart. I'd been there about 3 hours, walked out the side of the shop, I heard a little bit of a commotion, and there's 3 goats standing on this rental car that I've literally had for about 2 hours. So I shooed the goats off the car, got rid of the goats. The biggest thing about the tanks was, a lot of people don't know, but my Cobra from the 2019 C2C run still in Oklahoma. So we had a 50 plus gallon tank that was custom made for that car for the 2019 run. I started taking measurements out of that, removed the tank from the car, brought it to the shop, and it literally was a perfect fit for the car. After I got the tanks done, I made a bracket so I could put the front driving light on. And in order to do that, I trimmed the license plate, moved the license plate up, slid the license plate up, mounted the light underneath of it. And that was pretty much everything I did at the shop. There wasn't a lot more I did there. I put my antenna in and hooked up my small, simple CB. And beyond that, we were pretty much ready to go. I decided that, found the date. I'd done a lot of researching as far as to what traffic was flowing where. And we decided the optimal time, which was unorthodox, was to leave during a city day. More often than not, these runs are done on the weekend, But I started noticing as the pandemic had worn off, there was more people traveling on the weekends and less people traveling during the week, because at the time we left, it was easier to get out of the city where there was people coming into the city. So we literally were in and out of New York in pretty much no time at all, which allowed me to get up to speed and where I needed to be. My brother and I, did the balancing act of should it be what time we should do this and what day we should do it. And with him following traffic patterns and me following traffic patterns, we just decided that this might be an optimal window that nobody had possibly chosen before. My shoot time was for 26 hours, under sub 26. We were thinking 25, 30-ish. And, like everything, stuff happens on the run. So we got into New York, we're probably around 4 a.m. And I sat around and kind of had to wait. Being on a solo run, you don't really have anybody to talk to. You kind of rely on yourself, to keep your sanity or what little I have. I made my own mask so I could pull it up over my face and if somebody said something. Headed out of New York about 6 a.m. About 6 a.m. I got to the tunnel. There was virtually no traffic. It was as smooth sailing as I had ever seen in New York, especially for a weekday. It really kind of played right into our hands. The first stretch of road we ran pretty much trouble-free. There was no cop issues. Probably one of the craziest things across this whole run is I didn't see any lasers. There was no laser whatsoever, any state, anywhere. That was one thing we had planned for, and after putting an ALP system in it, which tends to be an expensive system, fortunately I had it from the previous car run, but we didn't need it. I never saw it at one point where I really need it. We made some decent time coming through Pennsylvania. We had some construction. There's a pretty good chunk of construction where came through Wheeling, I wouldn't say bottled up, but probably where I ran into first bit of traffic with construction. Got to the wrong side of the cones at one point in order to get by some people. The standard of my run, and it's seen in actually one of the pictures and has been brought up a couple times, is my cruise control. Anybody that's ever been in one of these cars before probably never puts their cruise control above 80, 85. So I decided, and we had talked about this before the run, I'm going to put the cruise control on the fastest speed it allows me to. And the reason for that is to keep myself from getting lazy. Anybody that's done a solo run before, I've done a couple of them, you actually realize that, oh man, I'm supposed to be going X amount of speed. Somebody's passing me in a caravan. To keep that from happening, to keep the speed up, I put my cruise control on 120 and drove with my foot above that. So at times where maybe my foot had laxed off or my foot got tired or, I had to relieve myself, like I kept the maintain. Now, it didn't stay at 120 the whole time, obviously, but mentally, that was one of the tools that I used to keep my speed and my average up. Other than that, a lot of it was done with calculations from my brother. We made really good time coming across to Ohio. Didn't see a single officer, which is terribly unusual for Ohio. The officers were minimal. I saw a few going the other way. Most weren't running radar. Unfortunately, I didn't have any spotters. But at this speed, it helped me not have spotters, because what I had developed in thinking is driving at this speed and having spotters could draw more attention to actually what was going on, especially during a weekday. To have, 4 or 5 different people, going by somebody at a high rate of speed, you take that opportunity of getting called in more. So we had no spotters through that end of it. We got through and got into St. Louis, made great time, and then I got a bogey. I had an officer that basically paced me for, I don't know, seems like an eternity. It always seems like an eternity. Several miles. And I don't know if it was the antenna on the back or what, that the car kind of stood out, but he paced me. I may have been called in, and eventually he pulled off. Got into Tulsa. I got in around what would be close to the rush hour, but Tulsa is a big city, and the good thing about the big cities at this time right now is they're prepared for rush hour. They have the lanes, they have the traffic, they have the ability to handle volumes of cars. So without volumes of cars, there's volumes of room to get through them. Not too many trucker issues. I had a couple truckers that were, dating each other in the left and right lane, and I radioed to them, said, trying to get through here. And when I think they glanced in the mirror, I think they saw the light bar on the front of the car, which is unusual for a Mustang. and they thought that possibly I was a pursuit car, or maybe somebody had radioed to them and told them it was a pursuit car. I don't know. Simple, hey, trying to get through here, kind of slid out in their mirrors so they could see the car. 2, maybe 3 of them promptly pulled over. The rest of them, if I wasn't going to put the lights on, they weren't going to care. So, and obviously, you know, I wasn't going to do that, so it didn't matter. The car spent probably 5 to 6 hours at least on shut off. And that's not terribly unrealistic. It may have been a little bit more. Obviously, you know, it's nothing that you log while you're going, but there was times where I would sit right at 159. Anybody tells you a stock Mustang GT goes faster than 159, they're lying. And my foot would tell you the same thing. Because it doesn't matter how hard you step on it, how hard you're going downhill, it goes 159 miles an hour. Which at times is frustrating because at opportunities, there was opportunities to probably run the 170s, 180s, but you were limited at what you had. But that also helped me on the other end of my fuel consumption. So you start getting up to those speeds, you start burning more fuel. I had mathematically calculated that pretty much 130 was the magic number as far as on the fill-ups. We filled up before, we filled up in the middle, and took me to the end. And actually, I think I had 39 miles to empty at the end of the whole run. So the mathematics and everything all played out, and the car balanced really well. And at the ends of runs, obviously, you know, picked up speed. Picked up speed meaning that the ideal is you want to get back to your target speed as quick as you can, so you don't lose on stops or lose on slow ups. The fuel stop was pretty quick. As I pulled into Tulsa, I had messaged ahead to my friends Grant and Brady. Grant had a newer model Chevrolet with a 150-gallon bulk tank, an actual bulk tank used for filling up machinery, farm machinery, and he had a 20-gallon per minute pump. So as I came off the interstate to the toll booth, I could see them parked in stage. Grant told me to pull around the back of the cars so that he'd have the pump ready, and I had already popped the trunk before I had even got stopped. There's 2 fillers on the big 50-gallon tank. We use one for the vent and one to fill it, or if we're at a pump, you can put 2 in at the same time. We started filling that. It was filled in minutes. While he was doing that, I'd quick relieve myself, kind of stood up, stretched, took a couple pictures, went around the side, climbed into the side, took the caps off, and started filling those tanks. Got the back tank filled and the side tank filled, and I was literally off in 8 minutes. You know, quick snapped a couple pictures, you know, thanked the guys. I think he brought me some beef jerky and maybe a water. And lo and behold, I get a message from him like 2 minutes later, the cops are here. And somewhere along the lines, apparently somebody had called the cops. For whatever reason, either my car had been spotted leaving the interstate and it, because of high rate of speeds going through Tulsa, or somebody had seen us at this little parking lot filling up this car with this great big bulk tank. So I don't know exactly the reason, but the guy got out, I guess, and kind of walked around and didn't see nothing to deal with, and he's got in his vehicle and left. Everything was going really well. My brother was in my ear telling me I was doing decent. I was sending him the shots. He was giving me bullet points of where you need to be, how you need to be, where I fell off. And then I got to California. And I pulled into California, and I don't get stressed out about much. Nothing really bothers me. And there I am, sitting at the border at the agricultural stop at 0 miles an hour. Sleep deprivation all started setting in, going, you're sitting here with a fuel tank next to you, covered up by a blanket. What are you going to do? And as I said, you know, apparently it was closer to 20 minutes I sat there. But strangely enough, when you do these runs, usually when you're doing them, everybody's around you, so you're not worried about the law enforcement at this point. You're just worried about the traffic getting out of the way so you can drive fast again. At this point, I was worried about law enforcement because I was at a point where they were going to check my car. And they moved the out-of-staters to one side, and they had a guy's car tore apart. And I just kept saying to myself, I'm going to jail. I am going to jail. And started planning on how I was going to get bailed out, how I was going to get the car back, and how I was going to get back home. So eventually, they ran us through the line and got up to the front, and I put my window down, and The guy asked me what my business was in California and why I was from Texas, and I told him that I had taken a job in California and that I was headed there because I was an essential worker and I was bringing all my stuff with me. He kind of tilted his head. He said, "Yep, thank you very much. Have a good day." The relief was there, but I needed to get back on my task of what I was there to do. So I got out of there as fast as I could possibly go. And at that point, it was make or break it. The window had shrunk. Now we're not looking at 25, 30 anymore. We're looking at, can I even do it under 26? So I get into, the area, it starts getting a little more congested, in the downtown Los Angeles area. Everybody knows what I mean, where you're driving in the desert, you can all out and, pretty much, if somebody catches you, they catch you. And there was nothing, literally flat out as fast as I could run through California, up the hill, down over the sweep, and into the city of Los Angeles. Then the lights started coming, and I could see lights in my mirror. And I said to myself, I have got to do something, because there's no question I'm going to jail. There's no yes officer, no officer, I'm transferring fuel for, COVID relief. I am going to jail. As he approached me, there was an exit coming up. Immediately got off the exit and I got redirected. So I basically took the series of exits and lost the officer as I got off. It turned me back around, so I was headed back the direction I was supposed to. So this is the one time that I can actually thank my GPS for recalculating, because it recalculated me that when I got off, it turned me and turned me and turned me and put me back in the same direction I was going. I saw the blue lights disappear, and I can only assume he must have taken the wrong direction. It was 1 for 4. So he had 4 directions to choose, and fortunately for me, he chose the wrong direction. But at that point, paranoia was starting to set in more. And the sleep deprivation, I was still on it as far as, ability and awareness and stuff, but my awareness was higher and higher, because you don't know if he's called ahead, and you start going those places. Oh, does he know I'm cannonballing? Did he send somebody to Portofino and then somebody's going to be there? As I went down through and started, going through the lights and stuff and pulling up to the Portofino, and I pull in and I look around, I'm looking around and I don't really see anybody. It's a Portofino. It's 4 in the morning, 4 or 5 in the morning. Nobody's around. Nobody's doing anything. I'm from Maine. I'm thinking like there's going to be some big fanfare there at 4 in the morning. I roll into Portofino, and first thing I start do is snapping the pictures and, sending something to my brother. Say, hey, we made it. This is my time. So we broke the 26. And the funniest part of the whole thing is, while I'm doing this, my brother's taking my dad to the airport so he can fly into Tulsa, where my house is in Oklahoma, so we can go on the bandit run. So my brother's doing updates. He's been up all day and night doing all this with me, and he's taking my dad to the airport. So as we're doing it, and he's driving along and he's dropping my dad off, so I get all the pictures and stuff, and I see the caretaker come by on the golf cart, and I'm like, oh no. I quick flipped the car around, snapped the picture on the front of it, and headed out. Pulled in behind the crab shack, ripped all the laser jammers, had taken the antenna off, thrown it in my trunk, and literally out of California. The sooner I get out of California, the better.
As many people know, the 4-rotor was a project I've had in the works for many years. It was a vision, and I made it very clear that was my intention. And then I started the project, and then it got quiet. So there's a lot of things that happened behind the scenes that really taught me some good life lessons on what it takes to take on such an insane project. The car started out originally as my very first sports car. It was a 93 Mazda RX-7 that I'd owned since I was 18. A neighbor had owned a slightly older one. I had no interest in rotary engines whatsoever. My mom was like, hey, the neighbor has this cool little red car. You want it? And as soon as I had gotten that car, it was a naturally aspirated 2nd-gen RX-7. I fell in love with rotaries. Then, of course, I'm the typical Fast and Furious comes out, and I went and got an FD, a 1993 RX-7. It was Montego blue. It was the middle-age life crisis in me. It was Montego blue and tan interior. I couldn't fit golf clubs in there, but I loved that car. Absolutely loved it. And every phase of my life, I upgraded that car more. That was just like everybody else. I'm gonna save up for this upgrade. It wasn't until the point that my brother bought an R35 GTR and beat me in a street race while I had 300 more horsepower than him, that I realized something had to change. And so I had to fight fire with fire, and I was going to go all-wheel drive because that was his advantage on the street. Long story short, I'd seen Gymkhana 7, fell in love with the Unicorn. They had solved all of the mechanical problems and challenges that I had seen coming up ahead. And so I reached out to try to find a way to use that technology in my car. So it's really interesting because the 4-rotor started out very well planned. For being somebody that has no experience with fabrication, I knew what the result was going to be. And I think that's the reason that the car never stopped being developed. The concept was this: take the Japanese feeling of balance that the car has. It was a very balanced vehicle. It was not lopsided at being overly one thing or another. It was capable of doing everything really well. And then take the raw American horsepower extremity, mix the two together. So it wasn't supposed to be what one of my other cars were, it was just a drag car. And it completely compromised the RX-7's handling, weight distribution. It was rough. It ruined the car. Making a car like that is a very tall order, because what you realize in the aftermarket for cars is that there are people that are drag racers. There are people that are autocrossers, and they know their discipline very well. Or they're really good at selling it, they're good at their discipline, either one. But that's the problem with being somebody that isn't capable of doing it yourself yet, is that you have to trust their word. And so when the project started, it was taken to a shop that was very experienced in drag racing. And so the chassis actually reflects that. The first parts of the chassis were built more like a drag car. And of course, I wouldn't know. I can't look at a series of tubes, consider it the internet, or consider it a drag car. You know, it doesn't mean anything to me. I just saw tubes being bent, welded in place. It was an absolutely beautiful thing. The other goal was to make an engine make more horsepower than anybody else had ever done on the street. And I was dedicated, obsessively dedicated with that. And there were a lot of things that were like, oh, you know what? Being more realistic, you shouldn't do that. So the engine itself was going to be a very difficult thing because 4-rotors aren't a production engine. It's not something that Mazda made. Mazda made 2 and 3 rotors, but not 4-rotors. So any 4-rotor you've seen is made by somebody. It's this guy's engine. And there's a story behind that engine, which those are fascinating stories, but that doesn't help you make horsepower when it breaks because of the story. I wanted an engine that by itself stood on its own merit and was capable of being reliable and make power. Building the engine became one of the biggest showstoppers ever. I had bought the parts, and they were infamously lost by a shipping company going from New Zealand to the United States. In fact, they made it to the United States just fine. They made it to the port. It wasn't until they made it to a place in Kentucky that they were lost. That derailed the project for about 7 months. I had gone back and forth with the company. They went and had their team look for this particular crate that had all my parts in it. Couldn't find it. It wasn't until a fan saw it on eBay. So not only had they lost the engine, they had tied me up for 6 months with not honoring the insurance. So I had paid to protect them against themselves, and they still wouldn't even honor that. The listing on eBay was accurate. There were details about these pieces that nobody would know even looking at them. They were custom to my setup. And so sure enough, those were my parts. And they were being sold by some metal recycling company out in Missouri. And so I, as well as the people around me, thought that they'd been stolen internally. I had a good friend that was in the Michigan State Police, helped start coordinating a sting operation with the Missouri State Police. So I ended up talking to the agent from the shipping company and be like, hey, listen, you guys have failed me. I'm taking it in my own hands. I'm going to get my parts back with this sting operation. And they call me back and they're like, call it off. Do not do that. That man legally owns those parts. I'm like, let's reword what you just said. You just said that man legally owns my engine. In no world does that make sense. And they're like, yes, we sold it to him. Do you not understand how that sounds? That you sold my stuff to him. And they're like, oh, well, the shipping label must have fallen off, bill of lading, the identification, that you must not have marked it. I had my name all over the crate. And the most damning piece of information is that the information that he had was only information that would have been on a sheet of information. You can't look at the pieces and recreate the information how he had listed it at eBay. So I go and buy my own stuff back on eBay, and I tell the shipping company, I want a refund for my shipping. A to Z, you didn't make it, you didn't honor your insurance, I want to be refunded. It was like $1,000 for a massive crate from New Zealand to the United States. They said no. And so 3 a.m, I did what I do best, and I complained. I ranted, and I launched the video, I think at 4 a.m, and then go to sleep. I wake up, look at my phone, and there's like 23 missed calls. No, I'm not that popular. I then go to my YouTube and look, and the video had 1 million views. All the missed calls were from their head of legal and their head of PR. They ended up finally refunding me my money. They ended up refunding my shipping. And they asked me to take the video down. And so a lot of people assume that I made money off of that. I didn't. I'm not a greedy person. I simply asked that, since I bought the motor twice, refund me what it cost from your mess up, dollar for dollar. I just want my money back, and then free shipping. So I thought that was the end of my problems. Yay, the story's over. That is the beginning of the adventure. Now I have half of a motor. Rotary engines are very much like a sandwich. Once you have the unique ingredients, the rest is just bread, mayo. It's a very stackable thing, and you can end up just making almost as many stacks as you want within reason. That was back in end of 2015, 2016, so that, we're moving forward, making serious progress on the build. People were saying, okay, you know what, if you're going to be tearing into this car, buy a new chassis, buy a roller. And I was like, emotionally, I can't. This is the story for this car. It was bone stock when I was 18, and I'd gotten it to this modified car. That's the car that needs to be my four-rotor. I had a strong suspicion that I was going to go all-wheel drive, but it wasn't set in stone. But now I had confirmed it because it had gotten way more attention, because everybody's like, okay, we were very aware, millions of views, Rob's got this engine, he's going to make something crazy. I started learning CAD to build the custom pieces. Now I'm adding drive shafts and axles, and it's not an engine that is very conducive to that. Piston engines actually have kind of a Y shape, and so there's a nice space for things to travel, such as drive shafts and axles. Rotary engine, everything's on one side, and that's the side that I needed to get stuff through, so that made it very difficult. Well, like I said, I had taken it to a shop in California, and a very competent shop, but they were drag racers. This is where a very interesting phase began. It was the phase of pay, and in 2 weeks you'll have something. We'll have something in 2 weeks. I had made it clear I wanted to take this engine that was now famous and put it on an engine dyno where you don't connect it to a car. You just simply have the engine sitting suspended in space, and you measure the amount of power that comes from the back. That's what most manufacturers do, and that's where the Hellcat has 707 horsepower. It's from there. To summarize that was 3 years of paying, oh, well, if you just get this, and I kept paying. And even to this day, I still don't have that engine running. So in 2016, a lot of people saw a massive push forward where my car was transformed into a concept of what the end result would be. I had very clearly wanted the Unicorn setup, which the Unicorn, you can take the body. It looks like a Mustang. It's not a Mustang anymore, but it's similar to like a truck where you can take the body off of the frame. So it's a tube frame chassis. I wanted that. I wanted that naked car, that raw, exposed mechanical look. I was told that let's not go that route. What you saw in 2016 was a car that was partially done like that, with the intention of not finishing it. Not my intention, the shop's. They're like, no, you don't need to do that. I'm like, but that's what I want. That chassis, again, excuse after excuse, that chassis never got finished. And it was a friend of a friend who was going to help come show up, and they're having marital problems, but then the other guy can't show up. It took me 6 months to get a steering rack swapped. There was one steering rack that showed up in 2016 at SEMA, car unveils. The world goes crazy for it. And in retrospect, it looks hilarious because, oh my God, it was an unfinished car. But because nobody was in that space, it was unique and useful. You can be unique but not useful. This was actually a cool concept. The world felt fit a need. After I brought it to SEMA 2016, I'd unveiled it at Garrett's booth, which is a very prestigious thing to me. The Garrett Turbocharger is a company I've looked up to for years. I'm a huge fan of forced induction, and they had taken a chance on me. So everybody was really sketchy. They were really worried about it. And then they realized that, oh my God, it's generated some serious awareness of our products while it's in our booth. At this point, I'm starting to get beat up by the audience saying, where is the car? I'm just waiting for the rest of the drivetrain to be finished. I was waiting for the rest of the tube chassis to be finished. So spoiler, that ended up never happening. I actually took the car from that shop And we're talking politically. We're not talking forcefully. I'm not somebody that hits head to head, because I was being almost held hostage on well, I'm the only guy that can build your engine. And I knew this. I had never built a rotary engine. They're very modular, but there's black magic there. I don't want to mess with that. So I politically took the chassis and was like, hey, there's this other shop that's willing to take the chassis and finish it. And so that caused a lot of stress. In 2017 through 2018, I was able to get the chassis finished. I say that in quotes because there was a lot of work done incorrectly from the beginning that propagated throughout the rest of the car. All four wheels were on the ground, connected to my dream car. The interesting thing was, now I was working in reverse. My goal was to finish the engine to then help provide the funds to finish the car. And now I had done the car and I was still waiting on the engine. And so I started doing other projects to buy time because, okay, I'm being told 2 weeks again. I'm being told 2 weeks again. So many people saw through that towards the end. They saw me do the rotary Corvette, the C5 Corvette. While that project had been a plan for a long time, the timing of it was really weird because I had no other project. I was out in California. I was waiting on that engine, and I, in confidence, in private, had said, please assemble this version of the engine. I kept being told, okay, well, we have parts A, B, and C, but now there's X, Y, and Z, and those are way better. And I'm like, I can't do X, Y, and Z. I have 100% of A, B, and C. Let's make A, B, and C work. The funds from A, B, and C will finish the car. The worst part about that was there are 3 other cars, and this is very verifiable. There are 3 other cars that were waiting for the same type of engine to be assembled. What happened was, this is the best twist of circumstances. The rotary Corvette comes out. I go to LS Fest. I storm LS Fest. An event ends up being managed by a huge company who then becomes one of the biggest supporters of my projects. So Holly ends up doing a phenomenal job helping me. Well, that combined with the views from those videos generated enough revenue, as well as the shirt sales of the LS swap crossed out with the rotary swap. I made that a limited shirt until the car fired up to show that, okay, if anybody bought that shirt, they truly believed in the project. It was just kind of fun, but it ended up becoming so pivotal in the future of my endeavors. So there up came an engine for sale, a complete engine. And not only that, it was a billet engine. A billet is, just a raw chunk of metal that is cut out to do what you need it to do. And while it's kind of a running joke on my channel, it's also founded in a lot of truth that a lot of the parts that are on my cars are so custom that they're one-offs. They are billet aluminum, billet steel, shaved down to the shape I need because you can't buy that widget off the shelf. So this billet engine was experimental. And that resonated with me because I'm pushing the limits. If I'm gonna be more, I'm willing to push the limits and try things that nobody else has done. So it ended up becoming the very first billet engine to run in the United States. It was truly my commitment to pushing the limits of rotary engines. It's really neat because I had met the guy through a friend. He had came to the States a year before, and so he had taken a chance on selling it to me when he could have sold it to others for more. And so he took a chance on me, and I came through. And so my goal was to do exactly what I had said from 2016, get the engine running. I'd begun acquiring fabrication tools, welding, cutting, whatnot. And so I built this rickety engine stand, partially to show off the engine, partially to run the engine. In the middle of 2019, I have this piece of metal next to this engine, this $55,000 engine, with tons of wires hanging off it. Looked like some sort of lab creation. We fired up the billet engine ourselves. The next 3 months following the engine firing up to all the way through SEMA to after SEMA was one of the greatest times of my life because instead of relying on experts and waiting and being given tons of excuses, this guy that the audience thought didn't know what he was doing because I'd been showing that I'd been erring on it being my fault. The questions went from that to now, wait, who's tuning that? Who's running that? How's this being done? To them seeing, oh, it's being done in-house. Right after SEMA, we were tuning the engine. This is a very experimental thing. And through the rush of it all, we had aluminum go through the motor. Fortunately, aluminum is a very soft metal. And so it just stuck things. There's seals in the engine, and it stuck them in space in ways that weren't open or fully closed. And so the engine started having weird compression. With the guidance of one of my more experienced friends, we cracked the engine open. We opened Pandora's box. We began cleaning all of the aluminum out of the engine. What that allowed us to do is understand what was inside of it. Now, you know, a rotary engine, rotors, apex seals, you heard the key words, but to see the tolerances, to see the clearances, to see exactly how this one was set up was a thing of beauty. So what a lot of people don't know, this is a VINwiki exclusive. We reassembled the engine for YouTube. I get it all together, and I said 3 days. We did it in 3 days. Literally 3 times 24 hours is the amount of time from cracking it open to reassembly. The shops back in New Zealand that machined the center of that engine didn't realize I was that serious about being that quick. And so I get an email back on the 4th day saying, hey, when you go to reassemble that engine, make sure there's not even a fingerprint on these tapers, these areas where the 2 pieces of metal touch each other and are supposed to hold friction. And all I saw was like this, like this alarm in my head going, I oiled all of that. I greased the parts that were meant to be metal on metal. I stared at the engine that night, I'm like, this whole thing has to come back down. So that night, by myself, no cameras and anything, I tore the whole engine apart again, which I wanted to get good at it. Tore the engine completely apart again, and then cleaned all the tapers off, and then reassembled it. A lot of people in the videos were like, oh, you know, the engine's never gonna run. The engine that was assembled by me alone, one night, disassembly and reassembly is the same engine that did all the burnouts and made all of the record horsepower. On my tune, up to idling, it's a very weird engine, so it doesn't idle like a normal engine. You can't treat it like anything. So we used my tune at the very low end, and then a friend of mine, Elliot, came out and helped me tune it to the high end. But we went and strapped it down to an all-wheel drive dyno, and we did what we set out to do. When you're doing YouTube videos, your goal is to be interesting. But I've also got $400,000 invested in this car. Interesting is still running after the dyno. So my goal was to go there for the first dyno night, and goal was to make 600 horsepower. A very solid number, but nowhere near the numbers I was claiming, nowhere near the numbers of my goal, but just to set the ego at the door and get this car on the rollers. We get it there, and unlike anything people have seen from a Rob Dom video, no problems. Car had no issues, absolutely not a single problem. There was another car there, he had tons of issues, like, you know, an alternator giving out, fuel lines having problems, like the typical thing that you have when you're building a custom car. This, nothing. So we're all like, well, that was it. We got to 600 horsepower like in minutes. You guys want to try for 1,000? So we're all like, okay, let's pause and think about this. Yeah, we want to do it. And so I had to make another wiring harness that night, install a couple more things because I purposely didn't, because I didn't want to get greedy. But next day we came back, threw the new wiring harness on there. I have 16 fuel injectors dumping tons of fuel into this engine. And on our first essentially dyno session, collective session, made 1,000 all-wheel horsepower, which I want to show my audience that 1,000 all-wheel horsepower is actually substantially more power than 1,000 rear wheel. You know, you've got a lot of power loss going through the drivetrain, but the amount of torque it takes, there's just a lot more involved. And so if you take that car right now and were to go to a normal rear wheel dyno, you'd make closer to 1150. But that isn't where I'm going to stop. That was where I started. And so we learned a lot. We collected a lot of data from that. And we're going to now go into a zone that nobody's ever been, especially for a street car, and just keep pushing it further and further.
Damon and I go back to Gold Rush 7 together. I drove a wide-body Ford GT at the time called the Belladonna. It was a crazy wide-body 2005 Ford GT. I became friends with Damon at that time. He was driving his, what had been a Scud maybe at the time. Anyway, we became friendly, and he always said to me, he said, Steve, one day I want to go to Japan. One day I want to go to Japan. One day I want to go to Japan. And I said, well, when you're ready to go to Japan, let's go. And he contacted me and said, Steve, we want to go to Japan, and we're only going with you. So I took them to Japan, and they wanted a real Japan experience. They wanted to fully experience Japan. So thinking about some of the things to do, obviously the LED Lambo crew was part of it, Liberty Walk and guys with cars, and tons of the parking areas where guys show up with GTRs and Supras and RX-7s and the whole Fast and Furious. I mean, I gave them Tokyo Drift in a real abbreviated short time. We did a rally in Japan too called the World X Series Rally, which was fun as well. But one of the highlights of the trip, I think, was they were like, Steve, we really want to dig deep into Japanese culture. And I said, how about if I introduce some real gangsters, like real gangsters, real thugs, guys who are missing fingers and stuff. I'm like, hell yeah, we want to meet those kind of guys. I call up an old friend of mine, we'll call him Mr. K. And Mr. K was a past tense, a bad boy. He's missing a couple of portions of joints from 2 of his fingers, I believe. And Dave and Damon didn't understand what was behind this and what was behind tattoos. You know, in America, we walk around, we have tattoos. I don't have tattoos, but people have tattoos all over their bodies. Show them off to little people. In Japan, tattoos are not shown off. Tattoos are traditionally only the work of thugs, of gangsters, people. And in Japan, even today, if you have tattoos on you, you're usually tatted if you're a Yakuza, from here, right down from sleeve, all the way up, all the way down, full body. But you don't show anybody that. Other than maybe the woman you're going to bed with or your buddies, but you don't show it off. That's not something, it's just something to be kept secret. When you're in a Japanese Yakuza or you're part of this organization, if you screw up, you have to pay a price. And the way that price is paid by a joint at a time is cut off of in many cases you cut it off yourself or somebody that you're close with cuts it off for you, and you serve that finger to your boss in apology for screwing up. So the guy that I saw that had the most fingers missing was an old friend of mine that I've met. He was missing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1/2 right there. The reasoning behind why it starts from the pinky, though, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it comes from the day of the samurai and holding a sword. The pinky is the controlling finger on a sword. So when you lose your pinky, you've basically lost your ability to fend for yourself, as a swordsman at least. And that was what was behind the cutting off of those fingers first. We called them into a hotel. Damon and Dave really wanted to understand how this whole finger cutting thing and tattooing things on. I was like, okay, well, we'll try to make you understand. So I decided I was going to stop down at the hotel in the lobby real quick before we went up. And they're nice people in the hotel. I said, can I borrow a knife? And they said, sure. And they brought out a little butter knife. I said, I need something a little sharper, please. And the lady ran back to the kitchen, came back with this pretty sharp knife. And I said, oh, okay, thanks. She goes, what are you doing with it? And I said, don't worry. I said, I promise nothing bad. But they were a little worried. We get up to the room, and we have Mr. K, and we have a couple of other Japanese guys, and then we have Dave and Damon there. Damon's like, hey, Mr. K, show us how you would cut off your finger. Well, he puts his finger down the table, and he pulls the knife out. And just as he's about to show how it would be done, hotel, we got a knock at the door. We open at the door, there's 6 people, every manager, all black, suited up at the door, and like, what the hell's going on in this room? Like, nothing. They just calmed down. Like, we don't like what's going on here. Can we have that knife back? I said, sure. We gave him the knife back and went to the butter knife for recreating this scene. But anyway, they were shocked. But this is the type of society, see, loyalty. It's loyalty. Whether you're a real thug or you're not, it's that loyalty to your boss. Mr. K wound up, his situation, he was late on a couple of occasions. In Japan, being late means, if you're 1 second past 3 o'clock and you're supposed to be there, you're late. 2:50 means that you're on time for a 3 o'clock appointment. He was late. That caused trouble or caused, negative effect on people around him. That cost him a joint of his finger. Did that. Mr. K got out of the lifestyle. He started when he was 15 years old. He got out of this lifestyle in his 20s, but he bears the marks all the rest of his life. He can never go to a public bath. He can never go to a sauna. Can't show his body to anybody. He shows it off to guys like Dave and Damon who like to see stuff like that. But in Japan, he's marked for the rest of his life. That's just part of the way it is. But there's guys who live that life. They got out of that life. They're good people, man. I don't judge those guys at all. What do they say? There's sayings like that everywhere. But, don't judge the book by its cover. Some really good guys with some good values, but who had rough upbringings and did some stuff that they regret. But some of those guys are some of the best people that I've met in Japan. People say, are they thugs? Are they gangsters? I said, I don't know. I know them for what I know them from. I know my relation. I know everything that I've agreed to do with them. They've agreed to do back. We've all kept our promises together. They've never done anything wrong to me, and I've never done wrong to them. And as long as we have a relationship like that, as long as I still got all my fingers, we're good. But for Dave and Damon, it was a real eye-opening experience in Japan. And their video of that was, so we filmed all these car videos and everything else in Japan. That video with Mr. K showing how he cut off his fingers and his tattoos, and an R35, a GTR engine, R35 powered high-ace van that I drove them around in that last day, shooting flames all over Tokyo, became our best video of a week. Even driving an Enzo, driving Liberty Walk cars, going to all these famous tuners, the best video was about a guy cutting off his fingers. They like that. They like the tattoos. They respect. They're jealous, actually, that guys like Damon and Americans can walk around showing their tattoos off to people, that we do that. They're jealous of that. They can't do that there, so they liked it. But then they take the opportunity to always say, let me show you. Now let me show you some real tattoos. And it's usually guys like Damon who look at them and say, holy crap, that is... And these are not electric gun. I don't know how tattoos are done, but these are guys who have laid down and spent months on a table with a guy with a wood carved stick putting some colored charcoal into you. That's the traditional way of doing it. It's painful and hours and tens of thousands of dollars in art on many of these people's bodies, all done by hand. So Damon respected what he saw, and they liked his style too. Everybody thought him and Dave were really nice guys. They were super respectful to the culture there. They were super respectful to everybody they met. And I told them anytime they wanted to go back, I'd be honored to take them back again because they were that great of guests of being. And I brought nobody ever to Japan before to do that type of thing with me. Not for any other reason, but they were great guests to have, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. Back in the 80s and the 90s, back before, when many of these guys who are now the standout guys of today, when they were really young thugs, or maybe some of them were becoming Yakuza at that time, the type of cars they drove and the way they customized them, there was a very distinct pattern to it. One, in Japan at the time, they only have numbers. They have Japanese letters on license plates, but they have numbers on their plates. The number 3 and the number 8, but the number 3 particularly is a very popular number in Japan. The dragon, the Japanese dragon that many of them have on there has 3 claws. This number 3 is a very popular number, especially to gangsters. Their license plates on their cars would all be 3333 or 333. And they would have to go to their DMV at that time and wait till they knew that number was coming out. Push somebody inside, I'm taking that number, that one's mine. And they would come back. There was no ordering system to get numbers. They would have to wait for those 333s to come up or 3333 to come out. So tinting their cars dark black. In the old days before Lexus was even in Japan, Lexus was here before it was in Japan. It was Toyota Celsius at the time was the popular car, and big S-Class Mercedes, S600s that were all the rage back in those days. Dark tinted glass, 3333, 8888 on the license plate, and you knew you don't go near that car. You don't screw with the guys in that car, they're gonna mess you up. And that was the way the Yakuza rolled back in the day. Well, over the last 10, 15 years or so, the Japanese government has clamped down on the Japanese mob bigly. I mean, they've been clamped down. They've been clamped down so hard that one, if you have former gang affiliation, you can't even buy a car in some prefectures in Japan. You can't register a car in your name. You're a marked person. They know, they'll run your name through a DMV system there, figure out that you're a thug or you have a history of that. You can't even buy a car. So now, the big thing is, if you are a thug, or I guess, it's not standing out. You don't want to stand out. So, can a real gangster, a real thug drive a Lamborghini with LED lights and strobe lights all over it? No. You stand out too much. You got to be low key. But you look at the guys, you know who they are. You see them. I mean, they're the suits, the way they're tailored, the way they stand, the eyes. You look at these guys, you know that's somebody you're not going to mess with. And obviously, if you can get a glimpse of their hands, and if they've done something wrong over the time, you'll know that you're dealing with somebody who's got a checkered past to some degree.
Maybe God hates Mustangs, I don't know, but it's not my fault. I rode motorcycles with a bunch of guys, and they were going to do a cross-country trip where we were all going to put all of our bikes in a container, ship them out to California through various ways, fly out, whatever, and then ride them all back. Well, due to some work commitments, a few other things, I couldn't fly out. I couldn't make the road trip out, so I ended up having to just sort of drive out and catch up. I contacted Budget Rental Car, and I picked a car up at Hartsfield, which was a little Toyota Corolla, just tan interior. The tires were probably tan. It was just tan all over. It was the most invisible, nondescript little car, and I'm not a huge guy. I'm 6'1", but it was a little cramped and a little tight, but you know, this was going to be my chariot. The license plate on my truck says all-nighter. I've prided myself at staying up for days on end. When I paint a mural, sometimes I'll stay awake for 3-4 straight days just painting day and night. I can just do that, and that's just one of my superpowers. So I head out and, drive across country, and it's fantastic. It's just, I'm seeing parts of the country I've never seen before. Across the Mississippi for the first time. I'm, seeing the landscape change, and, it's great to drive at night and to watch the sun come up as you're driving. I've driven across this country in about 43 hours, which is not a great time, but I was not trying to set any records. I was in a Toyota Corolla, just trying not to get a ticket and trying to catch up with my motorcycle. So I get to San Francisco early morning, meet up with the guys that have got my bike, and one of them follows me to the rental car place to return the car. And this is 20 years ago, but at the time, they didn't know the key drops, all that kind of stuff. I go and talk to the guy, here's your car, and he kind of looks at the paperwork for a minute, and he types on the computer and looks on the paperwork and, types on the computer some more. Says, hold on for a second. And he goes in the back, he gets the guy, another guy comes out, he looks at the paperwork, types in the computer, calls somebody on the phone, kind of looks at me, looks at the car, puts the phone down, said, where'd you get this car from? I said, Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta. Goes outside, he starts checking the VIN number, and he's checking the door, and he said, when did you rent this car? And so the night before last. And so he types in the computer some more, and he's a little perturbed, and I'm like, is there a problem? He said, well, that's an 8-day rental. And I said, well, I know, but I just drove it straight through, and the problem turned out that, back then, if you picked a car up like after 4, they didn't charge you for that day. And if you got it back before 11, they didn't charge you for that day. So I really only had the 1-day rental from Atlanta to San Francisco. And the computer was not having it. The computer was like, that's an 8-day trip, doesn't compute it. Now the guy starts thinking that maybe I'm trying to launder a stolen car or something. So he's comparing the VIN, and he's reading the car, and he just does not want to take this car back for some reason. I don't know what he thought I was trying to do. There was just something that didn't compute with this guy, and he was not having it. But, they dug around, and there was nothing wrong with renting a car and returning it, and, 43 hours later. But the fact that it was well over its first oil change and had, this copious amounts of miles on it for 43 hours, he was not happy. But it, it is what it is. So he took the car back, and we continue on the trip. The trip was exciting, but a few days into the trip, my motorcycle just had a catastrophic failure and was not going to make the trip. And I had limped it from where we were out in California through Death Valley on the 4th of July, actually, which don't ever do that. It's like driving in a hairdryer. Made it to Vegas, tried to get the bike fixed there, but it was just not going to happen. So the guys on the trip, I'm like, go on without me, I'll sort it out. My wife at the time was with me, so I decided, okay, look, we're in the Southwest, we're here to see something. The bike trip didn't work out, but let's don't go out like that. So I called Budget Rental Car up again, and I said, hey, what do you got that's cool? And they said, well, we got a convertible Mustang. It literally just came in today. It's got 4 miles on it. I'm like, that sounds fantastic. We take off, and we only had about 3 days. I had to get back to Georgia with the bike to get back to work. So I got 3 days to kill in the Southwest in this rental car. And again, kind of being my first road trip ever, I didn't want to miss anything. So, since I've kind of learned to more go a little slowly and process things. But at the time, I just wanted to shopping spree style, just frantically run through every national park and monument I could possibly see, So we just take off, and this is Grand Canyon and Four Corners and Castle Rock and Moab and the Arches, and just blowing through the Southwest. And I always really wanted to go to Colorado too. So, hey, we could cut up through Moab and go to Colorado. That sounds great. And so we get to Moab, and I'd been an off-roader and always been excited to see this place. But of course, I'm now in the least appropriate vehicle, but I wanted to see something. So we're in this Mustang convertible, and I see this little dirt road off to the side that looks like it kind of went out towards some pretty rocks and stuff. So, hey, let's go try that. It's a dirt road. This car can do it. So I drive on the dirt road, and it starts getting a little steeper, but the car's doing fine, and, driving, and a little steeper, a little rockier, and, my wife at times getting a little nervous. I'm like, we're fine, we're fine. I'm just excited. I just want to see what's around the next curve. So I kept going, and now we started going downhill again, and, it kept getting steeper and steeper, a little bit of gravel on hard rocks, and a little steeper and steeper, and, I'm not sliding or anything, but it just starts to turn into more of a Jeep trail, and I'm like, okay, it's probably time to turn around. And and if you've been to Moab or somewhere in the Southwest like that, it's like the old Roadrunner cartoons. It's just like a cliff with a little shelf on it and another cliff. And kind of nothing dangerous, but kind of a narrow road, no guardrail or anything like that. And I go to, stop the car, and I'm just going to back out the way I came. That seemed like a good idea. So I put it in reverse, and of course the tires kind of spin and the rear kind of walks over towards the cliff a little bit. So I stop and okay, I move forward about 10 feet, try it again, a little more over. And each time I try to back up, the car just wants to kind of spin in the gravel. And as it spins, it just wants to walk over towards the edge. And of course that's the side my wife's on and she's not happy. So let's just keep going. This trail just gets steeper and steeper. I don't really have an option to go back out, and it's like a Monday or something, so it's not like it's a weekend with a bunch of guys in Jeeps and trucks can maybe pull me out or something. So we basically just kept going. Eventually the road just starts getting steeper and steeper, and I go to stop and kind of plan on it, and the car just starts to kind of shimmy a little bit. I'm thinking, oh, this isn't good. There's this huge drop over here and a huge wall over here. So we just kind of slide down, and there's this little ledge in the rock, and the car just kind of, it wasn't huge or anything, but the car just kind of skates off the ledge. It just makes this god-awful scraping noise just up underneath the car and gets on the bottom of it. And the road thankfully kind of leveled out and crossed a little creek and turned out to get onto a regular road, and we were able to go back out that way. But I get to the stop sign, I could hear a scraping kind of sound under the car. Not good. So I get out, and immediately I noticed that the big ground effects piece between the front wheel and the back wheel on my side is just gone. And the one on her side was mostly gone. That's what was dragging. And the tailpipe in the rear, which is just a little V6, but the tailpipe was a little squished, and the valance was not quite attached in the back anymore. And I'm not one to tear up anybody's things. I don't trash rental cars on purpose, but I did immediately pat myself on the back for checking that little $12 damage waiver. I'm like, well, they're not going to like this, but it wasn't intentional, and I'm really sorry, and I'm sure I'll make it work. She was a very rule follower type person. Now she's not happy. You're going to be in trouble. And I was like, no, I checked the box. It's okay. And you're going to get in trouble. But now we got to get the car back to Vegas and get a van or a truck or something. So I've called ahead, and I'd reserved a truck to put my motorcycle in so we can drive the truck with the bike fallen soldier style back to Georgia. So I'm having a great time. She's actually sleeping. I'm just, sailing. And again, this is not a great driver's car, but I'm having a fantastic time. The top's down, sun's out, just blasting. And on the horizon, though, I see what looks like a mountain range. And I was like, cool, I've already seen the Rockies. It's really exciting. But the mountains just didn't look right. And it was just this wall with kind of looked like snow, but dirty snow on the top. And as I'm getting closer, I realized that it's a lot closer than I think. It looked like it was, 100 miles out on the horizon, but it was actually very close. And it was not a mountain range. It was a sandstorm. And it's like those ones that you've seen these pictures, the guys that, served over in the Middle East with these big walls of sand coming at you. I'm like, oh my God. So I pull over, put the top up, kind of wake her up, like, hey, check that out. And so it doesn't look good. So, we're thinking, there's literally nothing for 100 miles in any direction. Like, where do we go? She tells me, let's try to beat it. So I'm like, wow, I got to actually get a permission from my wife to go fast. So I'm pegging this thing out, but it's coming closer and coming closer. And eventually it's just on us. And again, it's, big winds, nothing like a tornado or anything, but you can just hear the sand just pelting this car. Just this awful, sounded like a snake hissing and a sandblaster. It was this pretty kind of a candy orange color, like a silver base with a candy orange over. It's a beautiful color car. And oh my God, it was just getting pelted. And so, driving through it, and there's lightning from all the static and just tops kind of whipping around. And again, the winds aren't that bad, but anyway, so we finally get to this little gas station and, pull in under their gas cover, but there's nothing again, the sand's just coming sideways. This car just gets hammered, and, finally the winds die down, and, get out to go inside, and the power's been knocked out. And I noticed that the building actually had like an exit on all four sides. And talking to the lady inside, they actually do that on purpose because these sandstorms are sort of common, and they want you to be able to get into the store not on the side that the wind was blowing. So I thought that's kind of interesting. But anyway, so we get inside and get a drink, get a few snacks, and go back out to the car. And it looked like your favorite Hot Wheels car from childhood, where you had played with it so much that all of the paint was just missing from the leading edges of the fenders and the wheel arches and the hood. And the whole thing was now just this, could be pretty cool now, but it was just this like satin kind of matte metallic orange now. It was no longer the shiny candy color it used to be. The plastic headlight covers were sort of cataract, like an old dog or something. Like they were just completely hazed over. The bodywork was metal, but the sort of nose piece of the Mustang was this McDonald's yellow color, and the paint was mostly missing from that. So it was just this yellow flaking through. This car looked like it had been on the bottom of the ocean, and it's literally 3 days old. So we get back on the road and, she's not even talking to me at this point. She's convinced we're going to go to jail. And again, like, there's nothing illegal about getting in a sandstorm. This wasn't my fault. This was an act of God, if anything. Maybe God hates Mustangs. I don't know, but it's not my fault. We've lost some time due to the sandstorm, and I'm really trying to get back in time. So we just hurtle through the night, and, somewhere south of Provo, around like Beaver, Utah, the wind picks up again. No sandstorm, but now it's tumbleweeds. They're actually like in the movies. I never really thought that, but they really just these big barrel things just come blowing through. And we're in kind of a hurry, and I'm on the highway, and I'm like dodging them. And it's kind of like a video game. It's like Frogger or something. You see them coming out, and of course it's at night, so they're just kind of coming into the headlights at the last second. I'm trying to swerve around a few, but I don't want to crash the car over a tumbleweed, so I have to hit a few of them. And then eventually I just caught one big one that still had like a big root ball on the bottom of it, and I hit it, and I just heard the pop of breaking glass. The headlights were plastic. This was like the fog light in the front of the car. And we get back to Vegas and go back to the stay at the Stardust Casino, which is still around there. Spend the night at Stardust. Go to take the Mustang back. And again, this is like something out of some 80s movie. I mean, it's like Ferris Bueller's Day Off when they launched the Ferrari at the back. This car is totaled. So I go inside and, it's a pretty young guy at the counter. And I just said, hey, man, I'm here to return the Mustang. I've got some bad news. It experienced a sandstorm and a few other mishaps. I'm very sorry, and I just want to work with you, whatever I need to do to make it right. And this guy, I don't know if he just either wasn't a car guy or just was the most laid back, chill rental car employee, or maybe because it's Vegas, stuff happens to these cars all the time. I don't know. He just kind of looked out and he said, wow, okay, well, you signed the damage waiver, so it's okay. I'm like, okay. Like, do you need to sign something? Like, do you need police report? He's like, no, we got insurance for this sort of thing. You're good, man. And I was like, cool. And just as I'm walking out, his boss comes storming in. What happened to the Mustang? I'm like, oh crap. So I turn around and trying to save this guy who just been so nice to me. I said, sir, I'm very sorry. I rented the car 3 days ago. We got in a sandstorm, experienced another mishap with the tumbleweed and the ground effects, and this was not on purpose, but I could fill out a statement. And so now he's mad. He's talking about calling the police and, this, again, back on the phone again. So he's on the phone with Budget again. I'm thinking like, man, it wasn't 5 days ago. Somebody else was on the phone with Budget. So, he's on the phone. He's looking out. He's going out, checking the numbers on the car. I'm thinking like, oh my God, they are never going to rent me a car again. So he's not happy, but nothing really could do. And again, this is why you should always get the waiver, whether it's $12, $18 now, get it, because you never know. So I go over to the rental desk. I've been at the return desk, go to the rental desk, and I go to pick up the truck that I had reserved, which was supposed to be an F-150, something big enough. It was kind of a pretty big bike I had at the time. But I go to get it, and it's this little like Ford Ranger flare side with the hard tonneau cover on the back, which there's no way this bike is even fitting in the truck, let alone with the tonneau cover. I feel like I'm already on thin ice with Budget, and asking to upgrade my vehicle or what happened doesn't seem like a great idea, but I got no choice. So I go stand in line. Now, the lady in front of me at the rental desk now is some fancy lady from New England somewhere, and she is, or New York or something, she is chewing the lady at the desk out because somebody had brought her rental car around and had not turned the air conditioner on first, and it was hot, and she felt very insulted that she had to get in a hot car. She's chewing this lady out. It's like Steve Martin in Plane, Trains, and Automobiles chewing out the rental desk lady. And, it's not that lady's fault, obviously, but she's taking it like a trooper. So the lady stomps off, and there's an old saying in the South that you catch more flies with honey. So I'm unhappy about being given the wrong vehicle, but it wasn't this lady's fault. So I just kind of, straighten up, and I just said, ma'am, I've come across a little problem with my rental car, and I think you might be the person that could fix it. Can you help me, please? And she said, well, sweetheart, I'd be happy to. So I explained to her the problem, big motorcycle, small truck, asked if I could take the fiberglass cover off. She said, no, those are drilled in. You can't take those off. And she said, well, we have Lincoln Town cars. Do you think it would fit in the trunk? I kind of look out back. This motorcycle was a little over 9 feet long, 3 feet wide. It was not going to fit in the trunk, but I thanked her for the suggestion. I said, well, thank you, ma'am, but I believe it's a little bigger than that. I'm going to need a van or something. And she said, well, what did they give you, that little truck? I said, yes, ma'am. I thought it was going to be a full-size truck, but it turned out to be real little. She said, well, that's just never going to work for you. Well, tell you what, I'll give you a full-size van for the same price as the little truck. I said, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Put the bike in the van, bought some ratchet straps, hooked it in the back, took off cross country. Now we're camping in the van on either side of a motorcycle with like the exhaust here and the straps. In Arkansas, stopped for the night. I went inside to get something to eat. Somebody tried to break into the van, I guess to steal the motorcycle, so they smashed the window out of the van. Now the van's full of broken glass, and I'm thinking like, budget rental car is gonna kill me. So we make it back to Athens with no mishap. They go explain the window in the van. They had actually kind of tried to crowbar the door, broke the glass out of the door. The door's gonna have to be replaced. Again, not my fault. I think to this day, there's probably a picture of me somewhere at Budget Rental Car with a red line through it that says, do not rent cars to this guy.
Does somebody owe you $1 million for a McLaren F1 that's in Mexico tied to El Chapo? Now, I've often said that my personal dream car is a manual transmission Lamborghini Murcielago LP640. I own one and I can't imagine ever being without it, but the end-all be-all money no object dream car for me, like many car enthusiasts, is a McLaren F1. Now, of course, I don't have a personal life trajectory that's gonna mean that I spend 10, 15, 20 million dollars on one of the 106 cars that exist. Some of them, the LMs, are probably worth $30 million or more today. So I don't really think, barring any drastic life changes, that I'm ever gonna have one, and I'm very happy with my Lamborghini, but I do harbor the fantasy that one day, one of the cars that's not accounted for, one that has some bad history, too many miles, is in really bad shape, or hidden in a barn somewhere, that I might find it, and it might be the way that I end up owning one of these cars. About 9 months ago, I got contacted by a VINwiki viewer saying that he thought he knew where the missing McLaren F1 in Mexico was. And he had some information that was unique to the car, not the kind of stuff that you could just go out and Google, and he said that he had some ties to the people who had control of the car. Now, the car in question is chassis 39. Now, keep in mind, there is not like a consummate registry of all of the McLaren F1 VINs. We have probably the most complete list in the VINwiki app of the McLaren F1 VINs, but again, it's very much a working list, not complete by any means, because not even the factory has disclosed all that. Most of the chassis numbers are pretty public and people know about them, but the full VINs and where they are and things like that is still shrouded in a lot of mystery for a lot of them, especially this car. Now, the car in question is Brazilian brown metallic with a red interior and now gold wheels. It was built late in 1995, we think, and it could be with a build date that was in 1996 or in 1995. Now, the car was being built for the CEO of McLaren, Ron Dennis. And when it was completed, his wife thought it was so hideous due to the specification that she refused to let him own it. And he ended up buying Chassis 50, a magnesium silver car. And so the car was supposedly sold to a local buyer in the UK who drove it a little bit, but it was still being marketed for sale by the factory. And in 1997, it is generally thought that the car was sold into Mexico. Now, there are rumors that it was sold through a dealer in Texas into Mexico, and also that it went illegally through Brazil. Regardless, there are pictures of the car in 1997, so the car somehow makes it to Mexico. Now, this chassis, chassis 39, is frequently confused with chassis 29, the other brown McLaren F1. That one is called Creighton Brown, and it was built for Creighton Brown, who was one of the shareholders that helped Ron Dennis take over McLaren in the 80s and run it into the 90s, and was also very much attached to the racing program and things like that. Now, the most interesting thing about the car in these 1997 photos was actually the registration plate, P440CPJ, a UK plate. Now, obviously the car had made it into Mexico, but it was still wearing the UK license plate. And that was a little bit confusing, but it's gotten a lot more confusing lately because that license plate is now seen regularly on McLaren F1 GTR Chassis 06R, a car that's owned and driven regularly by David Clark. Now, he worked with the factory in sales when the F1 was new, and he's the man largely largely credited with taking the F1 racing so successfully. So this is the Harrods livery car, and it's driven in all these events all over the world, and it usually has this license plate on it. And so that was something I never really understood, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, there are a ton of rumors surrounding what happened to Chassis 39 when it went into Mexico. And a lot of them contradict, but they are all consistent in that the car was owned by someone very close to Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. El Chapo, obviously known to be the leader of the Sinaloa cartel for some time. Now, he was in prison from 1993 until his first escape in 2001, when this car would have gone into Mexico. Now, many of the rumors say that the owner's name was Ricardo Beltran, and that he went by the nickname El Robachivas, which means the goat thief. And there's no other real mention of someone named Ricardo Beltran attached to El Chapo in that period of time. There was a Beltran family cartel that sort of spun off of the Sinaloa cartel at one point. There are some people named Ricardo Beltran that are a little bit younger and now connected to trafficking money and laundering money into the US. Hard to say. There was another person, though, that did go by the nickname of the goat thief, El Robachivas, but his name was Humberto Ojeda. And he was very close to El Chapo, very high up, and known to be one of the most prolific drug runners that El Chapo had. He was known to make $300 million moving 220 tons of cocaine for the cartel. And he was killed by another member of the cartel in 1997. Now, that is consistent with the rumor about the car, because the owner of the car was known to have been killed sometime in the late 90s or early 2000s. That's really where the story gets almost the most ridiculous. When this guy gets killed, whoever the owner is, he had not told anyone where the keys were to his McLaren F1. And so the family and the cartel, anybody connected to him, wanted to hide the car because, of course, at the time, the government was trying to seize anything they could that was related to the cartel or El Chapo. And so they hide the car supposedly under a tarp in a field in rural Sinaloa, but regardless, it went away. So nobody from that point on knew where the car was. Now, the rumor was that whoever had control of the car inquired to the factory around 2004 asking to buy a key for it. Now, presumably, because the guy who owned it was dead, it was in Mexico, it may not even have come in there legally in the first place, they probably did not have any ownership documentation. And I would assume, like most key orders, you had to prove that they owned it. So regardless, McLaren said no the first time. But according to the rumors, they persisted, and on their second request, McLaren quoted them either $200,000 or 200,000 pounds, which would have been about $300,000 at the time. Now keep in mind, in 2004, when this would have been happening, that's the same year that I was offered the collection of Wyclef Jean's cars, the McLaren F1 he had with about 40,000 miles, his Pagani Zonda S, and his Ferrari 360 Spider, all for $900,000. Of the package, we thought 600 or so was the F1. So this may have been half of what this car was worth. And keep in mind, it was brown over red with gold wheels. Now, there's barely any photographs of this car, but it's generally thought to be one of the uglier F1s. In fact, it was so ugly that the person it was built for, the person mostly responsible for its actual existence in the world, couldn't even own it. Now, at this point, I think that's what makes it awesome. Not only this amazing story that goes with it, but the fact that it's a very unique, very strange off-the-wall color combination. What could be better? Brown cars are awesome. So obviously the family says no to this ridiculous quote, and the car just sits. So presumably at the point that this guy's contacting me, telling me that he knows where it is with pretty specific ideas in terms of proximity to different places, so he has pretty high confidence that he knows who has control of the car and where it's located. And his real ask of me is, Ed, could you help me find a buyer so we can make a commission on this? Now, of course, my immediate thought after putting all the pieces together is, this may be my only chance to buy a McLaren F1. Because you think about it, all right, let's say the car would be worth 8, 10, 12 million bucks if it's perfect, which it is not. It's been sitting for 16 years. It was inevitably bought with profits made from the trafficking of drugs, so it may always be subject to being seized by the Mexican government. It probably has no ownership documentation, so you're going to be buying this thing on a handshake and a bill of sale, if you can even go down there, because I had been told that I could never go to this part of Mexico safely. Doesn't matter how many bodyguards you have, like, it's just not the place you go. Now, not to disparage Mexico, it's just obviously it's cartel territory and you're trying to do business with the cartel, and I don't think they're the people that I want to shrewdly negotiate with. But regardless, it's got all these devaluing factors, not the least of which is it doesn't have a key. It's going to take a multi-million-dollar restoration if you go through the factory, probably $500,000 if you were to do it in the US. There's a lot of things between this car where it is and wiring the money to a cartel and probably getting audited every year for the rest of your life and having a McLaren F1 that you can own, drive, and use. So I'm thinking this car may only be worth $2 to $3 million. Now, that's a ton of money. It's more than my net worth, but hey, it's not 10. It's an awesome F1. I know a lot of banks, and I could probably make this happen. Now, knowing a lot of banks also came up in my research of this car because I talked to someone who knows about most of the F1s in the US, and he knew about this car. In fact, he knew a lot about this car because about 5 years ago, in his research of it, he heard a rumor that a US leasing company, a bank, had a lien against this car for $1 million when it was sold into Mexico. Now, very few leasing companies were going to even write a lien for that much back then, and they certainly weren't going to let the car go out of the country, but anything could happen. So I call Mitch at Premier Financial Services, one of the supporters of the VINwiki channel, not only to say, hey, I may need the biggest loan you've ever thought I would ever ask for, but also, does somebody owe you $1 million for a McLaren F1 that's in Mexico tied to El Chapo? And he said, maybe to the first thing, no to the second thing. I called the other banks that it might have been. They all said no. But this guy's idea, bright idea, had been to buy out the loan, travel with a tow truck to Sinaloa, and repossess the car from the cartel. Now, fortunately, he had some very intelligent friends who knew a lot more about Western Mexico, and they told him that was a really, really bad idea and that he would not make it out alive. And so not worth the risks there. So he had kind of dropped it at that point. But again, I had to do some more research to make sure that I wouldn't even be buying a car that had this crazy lien attached to it. At this point, we're into June, July, and his travel plans keep getting pushed back. The COVID shutdown of the borders that was keeping us from being able to drive to Alaska via Canada to shoot the Avalon King S55 off the cliff was also stopping my McLaren F1 treasure hunt into Mexico. And so he keeps telling me he can't go, even though he has dual citizenship, Mexico and the US, he just couldn't get across the border, not even to go to grandma's house most of the time, unfortunately. And so his plans keep getting pushed back and pushed back. And eventually, it looks like he's going to be able to go. But then he introduces this unexpected wrinkle. His side hustle, like many VINwiki viewers and fans, is buying and selling cars. And he said he had this car that he really needed to sell in order to finance his trip for him and the couple of friends that were going to go with him down to Mexico to hunt for this McLaren F1. And it was a Jaguar XJR, I think an 07, that he wanted like 15 grand for, which was probably 50 to 80% over true wholesale for this car. And of course, I'm like, dude, I just want you to find this car. We had talked about what a reasonable finder's fee was, considering that I wanted to buy the car rather than us trying to market it somewhere else and get a commission that we might split. And I was like, look, if we can get this deal done, I'm going to pay you $25,000, $50,000, whatever is fair for you finding me what's hopefully like a $1.5, $2 million car maybe. And so, I said, look, I'm going to take care of you. If I need to do that preemptively by buying this Jaguar, I'm going to do it. And in that moment, it occurred to me that this might be the greatest scam ever conceived against me, because there was no way I wasn't going to offer to buy that Jaguar at almost whatever price he wanted. Who cares if it's twice wholesale money? I want him to go. And worst case, I'm just the world's most reluctant Jaguar owner, and the Jaguar comes with this story attached to it. And so I'm like, I'm probably getting scammed, but I'll do it. But then I knew it wasn't a scam because he didn't let me. Because the next week, El Chapo's kids started a street war over the territory. I think his nephew got killed. It was a massive mess, and he's like, look, no one can go to Sinaloa right now. Nobody's going to go to Culiacan and look for anything, much less ask around for a McLaren. So we're sidelined again, back to the drawing board. Over the next few weeks, nothing happens. Finally, in November, he's able to make it down. And unfortunately, he learns pretty quickly that the person who he had been told was in control of the car and was interested in selling it had passed away a couple of years prior. So the friend of a friend who thought they knew and all these things. And he did have a lot of confidence that that was the gatekeeper to the car. But unfortunately, that's kind of where the trail dried up. And he's still asking around. We're still trying to figure out if the car is there. Now, another rumor had around that time been presented to me unsolicited. So somebody else from Instagram contacts me and says, I heard that the missing McLaren F1 in Mexico went to Mexico City about a year ago at a very, very cheap price and was repainted black, and that the owner was never going to let it see the light of day again. Okay, perhaps that could happen. You know, it staying in Mexico was always going to be a really likely thing because getting it across a border was never going to be easy. Now, fortunately, it was in the possession of people very good at getting things across a border, but that did kind of make sense. There were a lot of very wealthy people all around Mexico, certainly in Mexico City, that might have wanted a trophy McLaren F1 to just put away and show people they really, really trust. There's also legitimately another black McLaren F1 that has been in Mexico City. So it's possible that the person contacting me had just seen that and assumed there was only one McLaren F1 ever in Mexico, which is not true, and kind of put the stories together. But regardless, I chased that through several people that would know, and nobody even knew if the black car was still there, and certainly they didn't know or believe that it was the brown car that had been painted black. So nobody knows where this car is. My guy comes back to the US, kind of sorry, sad, whatever. I'm like, dude, this has been a wild adventure and something that I very much enjoyed digging into, but I really wasn't done digging. I wanted to find out what else could be known. Now, in the VINwiki app, most people make posts based on license plates, but we get the VINs from the government agencies for the plates, and we post by VIN. So we reference the license plates, but all the posts are categorized by VIN so that when a car gets a different license plate on it in the US, which happens all the time, usually for every registration, we're able to keep tracking the cars. And that only works in the app for the US. Now, it works for other countries. We're still developing out an international version, but it does work in the UK. So I ran P440CPJ through the VINwiki app's UK backend, and the VIN that it comes back to is for chassis 39, not the race car VIN. There are services like Carfax and AutoCheck where you can get broader vehicle history reporting in the UK. It's not quite as comprehensive, but it's useful. And so I ran it through one of those, and usually you enter it by the registration plate rather than the VIN there, because it actually only shows you the last of the VIN. But it is the last of chassis 39's VIN that goes to that plate in the UK, consistently registered for full MOT since 2005. There's several theories about why that might be. One is that he legitimately bought the tag. You can do that. There's a huge market for buying license plates. It's how Shmee gets all of his. And they can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, this one's not a clever word or something pertaining to an F1. It doesn't really make sense that it would be that desirable, probably not desirable enough that you'd want to be known to send money to a cartel in Mexico in order to buy it. But that's one possibility. The other is that he knew that at one point this was a registration to a McLaren F1 in the UK, and he just wanted to remake the tags, which I believe is very illegal, put them on his car, knowing that if anybody ever runs it, they're going to see some McLaren F1. He probably has one with no visible VINs, and he says, I'll be able to drive it without having to pay Lanzante to street convert my GTR and make it less race car-ish. Maybe he wanted to keep it as pure as it could be and still be able to drive it around on the road. That's a possibility. The other possibility, because that registration began in 2005, is that in 2004, when the family or whomever in the cartel contacted McLaren trying to buy a key, they said no. Then eventually they said half the car's value, essentially designed to say, well, what do we do with this car? Maybe the factory said, hey, here's a guy who we know quite well, and he'll buy your car. And he'll secretly get it out of Mexico, not want to make it public because he doesn't want the Mexican government to come find his car and seize it, but he just moves the license plate onto his other McLaren F1, which he drives around regularly, takes to Goodwood, does all the things with, and pretends that it's that car. There's no way to know, but if I were to guess, I bet he's got that car tucked away in a dark basement with some whiskey on the walls and some beautiful car posters, and he only goes down there to be with his McLaren or his other McLaren and show people that he really, really trusts. But if I was that rich and I was presented with that opportunity, I think that's exactly what I would do. But who knows? No one knows where chassis 39 is, but over the last 9 months or so, I have truly enjoyed the treasure hunt to try to find it.
Guys, watch out! I just got my doors blown off by a cop car heading to California. When the lockdown came, honestly, I just wanted to go out and drive. Not only because the roads were empty, but also because people said, well, you shouldn't do that. It's unsafe. I promised my wife that I wouldn't do any more cannonballing. after 27-25. And I stuck to that promise, but I was certainly begging because I had been on a number of essential trips, and I saw how empty the roads were and just how much joy it brought me to drive when there was nobody else on the road and nobody hogging the left lane. It was like all of the Karens had stayed home, and they were the same people who sit and park in the left lane and never move over. So it was a truly awesome experience being out on the road and just driving fast everywhere. So I got to watch two other teams make runs, the ones that I had helped scout, and both of them were in imminent danger of taking our record. And it was certainly a little bit of a stressful time, very emotional time for me. I wanted to see somebody that I knew and respected carry the torch, take the record, but I certainly didn't want it to happen that quickly. Those two guys didn't end up beating the record, so I was able to go to sleep that Sunday night. But then we got a message that somebody else that we had never heard of was closing in on our record and was about to beat it, and they certainly did. Some of you heard about the 2638 story and the borrowed Audi, and it was certainly hard to accept that that was how it had gone down. Just because there was no traffic and no cops, somebody jumped in a car and went out and beat our time, especially after we had spent so much time and effort and poured emotion and years of planning into beating Ed's record.
So after my Mercedes got wrecked on April 4th, I was pretty heartbroken, but I did think that maybe God was telling me, like, you're kind of done with this whole cannonball thing.
Just when I thought that I had come to grips and made my peace with being retired and just seeing the record go away, my wife sends me a text message. And she essentially said, who am I to impose my ethics on you if you were doing this with a clear conscience? And I think this actually is safe to do when there's nobody else on the road. And I don't like how you kind of lost the record. And if you want to make a run during the quarantine, you have my blessing. And I'm like, great. Now you say it. I can't call your bluff. Arnie's car got wrecked. What the heck am I going to do now? So I called up Arnie and said, all right, I've got permission.
How are we going to come up with a car as traffic is starting to mount? People are not following the whole quarantine thing. So we had to do something quick. And the quickest alternative was Troy's Corvette that he had run in the Cannonball a couple times. And Doug bought it. So he sends it to me to kind of go through it and make sure that it's ready to go. We had about a week's worth of work we had to do to it. I took the car out on the Monday before we were supposed to go and realized that there is no way that I'm driving this fiberglass sports car across the country at those speeds. It just didn't feel right, and I knew I had to go back to the German sedan. So I knew that my buddy Eric had this Audi S6 that had some mild work done to it that he had promised that he would sell me when he was done with it. So I called him on Tuesday morning and I said, Eric, I got to level with you. I need to make another run. My Mercedes is wrecked and I need to buy your car. And he's like, well, you're in luck. I just bought a GTR and I'm looking to sell it. I said, I'll be there in 30 minutes. So I picked the thing up at noon on Tuesday and the 3-day Cannonball build began. In Cannonball, my favorite part is building the car and preparing, which in this circumstance, we're both out the window. So the build of this car was going to be like a reality show where you build it in a few days. But in this reality show, we were actually going to build it in a few days. So the car is a hodgepodge of Cannonball cars that I had. We stripped all of the countermeasures off my Ford LTD that we were going to run in the C2C Express in 2019. We robbed the fuel system out of the E63. We took the electronic stack out of the Corvettes. We took the CB antenna and a couple other odds and ends off of my Crown Vic from the 2904. And in a few days, we had ourselves a Cannonball car. So what's funny about the Audi S6 is it was actually the car that I wanted to build in the first place before the Mercedes. But seeing that AMS did not have a bunch of parts for the S6 like they did the E63, I wanted to run a full alpha packaged car. And at the time they didn't do tuning and really only had a couple parts. So that's why I chose the E63. But the reason I wanted to do the S6 is it can kind of be disguised as a Ford Taurus. So seeing we were pretty late in the whole quarantine thing, we were already into May, traffic was already really picked up, and really the only advantage we were going to have would be leaving Manhattan at any time we wanted. So the plan was to leave at 6 p.m. and get through Denver before 8 a.m. the next morning.
Here we go to New York. I called in my former co-driver, Dunadell, who ran with me in the C2C and Ultra Beige and helped me win the 2018 run because Berkeley was unavailable and Dunadell was absolutely ready to go, waiting for the call.
My cannonball story started in about middle school when I read about Alex Roy's record, and then progressed when Ed's record broke in 2013. I remember vividly meeting Doug Tabbitt at a Cars and Coffee in Cleveland. It was July 4th, if I remember correctly. And essentially, we were drawn to each other by both of us having antennas and screens in our cars. My GLI and his Corvette were both very reminiscent of vehicles we had seen and looked up to, Alex's M5 and Ed's CL, all vehicles that we, strive to emulate almost. Doug and I became fast friends and maintained a good friendship over the next couple of years. And it really blossomed when Doug tapped me to be his co-driver in the Monte Carlo, now dubbed Ultra Beige, for the 2017 C2C Express. Of course, that run ended rather haphazardly in Indiana on the side of the road at a transmission shop of all places. And then we progressed to 2018, of course, finishing, also heartbreaking, but still winning in Ultra Beige. And then moving on to 2019, unfortunately, when Doug and Arne were looking for a third co-pilot, I was unable to make it. I was starting a job that week, and I decided to, pass the torch, and I gave the opportunity, which, of course, the 2019 C2C became a trial run for the 27-25 run later that year in the E63. So as soon as I heard that Doug, Arne, and Berkeley had set the record, I was ecstatic, but also part of me had a little bit of a heartstring pull, and I felt that, the next opportunity I got to, if anything ever happened, I would be lining up at Doug's door and Arnie's door to be the third man. And lo and behold, as soon as 2638 came out, I remember calling Doug and said, when are we going? When are we going? And he sort of said, well, I've got to talk to my wife and whatnot. A few days later, I got the call and we were headed to New York.
And it was eerie in New York City because there's no cars, but there was people and bikes everywhere. And the new risk was driving through an intersection, even if you had a green light, you might have bicyclists just running the red lights. It was like there's no traffic laws anymore. Cars didn't have the right of way. So that presented a new challenge. But because of the lack of traffic, we were able to make it out of Manhattan in 4.5 minutes and got stuck at one red light, and that annoyed us, which is crazy because usually Manhattan is just, you're stopped all the way out. So we quickly got up to speed and we're on the way.
Honestly, it almost felt too easy. Like it didn't even feel like this was even gonna count, because up to then we had, no problems at all.
We had an incredible team of scouts lined up that had our backs, that wanted to see us get the record, and that helped us out in Pennsylvania because we came up on 2 PA state troopers in short succession. And thankfully we had just passed one of our scouts. So we called him and said, hey, we need you to come take one for the team, because we had no idea how long we might be stuck behind him. And so he came flying up and got ready to pass one of them, and the trooper got off at the exit. So we took off again. 5 minutes later, get stuck behind another one. Call him up. Hey, it's your time. So he comes flying up and gets ready to pass him again, and he turns around in the median. So thankfully, we didn't have to pay his ticket for him, but we were able to continue on and not get stuck behind the troopers for a while, because that can certainly take a lot of time off.
So across the Midwest, we were hauling. That was where we had a couple of 125 mile an hour averages across multiple states, and we were able to get our average to Denver up to 120, which is exactly where we needed to be sub 26 hours. So one of the biggest problems with this car is at 160 miles an hour, there's this crazy, like, air buffeting, like, whining noise that you just can't drive faster than that, or otherwise it'll drive you crazy. So that definitely kept our top speed down. So at no point did we exceed 175 miles an hour.
We got to about Iowa, had a hiccup. I honestly thought we were done. I had wanted to get Michelin Pilot 4S tires, but they were on back order. So we settled on the Continental Extreme DWS, which was a great idea if we had done the run in April, but we were in May now and it was super hot out. And so they were a little bit spongy for performance driving in warm weather. All of a sudden the car was just like super vague and almost uncontrollable. I'd like turn the wheel to change lanes, and I'd turn back and there'd be like a delay. And then there was this vibration in the front end, and it was all over the board. And I'm like, I mean, it's gotta be tires. It feels like tires that have just gone completely to crap. Or like when you overheat your tires on the track and they're done the heat cycle and they're just like, you're just all over the board. That's what it felt like. And I'm like, there's no way these tires are that bad, but maybe that's it. That's gotta be it. Arne was asleep in the back, and I told Dunedell, I'm like, I think we just gotta like try to let some air out of the tires. Like maybe that'll help and give us a little more grip. But in the back of my mind, I'm going, this is crazy. If they're this shot already, we're never gonna make it through the mountain pass. I mean, we're like 1,200 miles into the run. My gut just sank because I'm like, we're done. This is not gonna work. This is a Band-Aid. And Arne woke up and he's like, what the heck is going on? Why are you going 60 miles an hour? I'm like, this car is awful. It's got a mind of its own. And I literally just like took the wheel and did this and just kind of like threw the car, and it did this. It went back and forth both directions. He's like, man, that's crazy. What is wrong? And I'm like, I have no freaking idea. This car is driving itself. And he's like, wait a minute. Do you have the like lane change assist thing on? I'm like, I don't know. What's that? And he's like, there's an icon on the dash. It like has the 2 lanes. I'm like, yeah, that's on. He's like, you moron. That's what the vibration is. Every time you get to the lanes, it's giving you a vibration. It's trying to put you back into the lane. I'm like, oh my goodness. So it took us probably 10 minutes to try to figure out how to turn this darn thing off. And we finally got it turned off, and we're on our way. But that was our big moment of like, we're done. This ain't gonna happen. And it was all just to my idiocy and lack of understanding with technology, because the newest car I own is a 2000 Mercedes and has heated seats and rain sensing wipers. Ooh.
So to me in cannonballing, the most important thing is safety. And just like the 27-25 run, we weren't passing people at excessive speeds. There was no passing on the shoulder. And a lot of people are dumbfounded, you know. They think it's like the movies, like it's a real life Dukes of Hazzard or something, which it's far less dramatic than that. And given the less traffic, it was quite a bit easier.
Arne is a master of disguise. The E63 was awesome. The S6 was awesomer because it sort of looked like a patrol car. However, I'm not sure which was a better disguise, because the E63 became known as the silver passenger car because that's what was described over the scanner when we got called in Iowa. Perfect. Could be anybody. However, the S6, while it probably kept us from getting called in multiple times because people mistook it for a police car, it bit us when we got called in Colorado because the person was incredibly descriptive and even called out the unit number and he knew it was an Audi dressed up to look like a patrol car, and that's what came over the scanner. So we're like, well, there's no mistaking that they are looking for us. So Arne's driving. I'm frantically looking for a way around because we heard the cop report back, and he goes, yeah, I'm at M4 such and such. I'll be waiting for him. So I'm going, all right, we got to get off on surface streets. There's like 13 miles to the border of Utah. So let's just take surface streets to get around this and get there. So I'm looking at the map. I'm trying to figure out where the cop said he was going to be. And I finally realized that, you know, when they called us in, they reported us at mile marker 18. We were moving so quickly that by the time it came over the scanner transmission, we were at mile marker 13, and we had already passed the cop in the median that had said he was waiting for us. So I figured that out, and I'm like, Arne, friggin' hammer down, let's make it to the border. There's nothing between here and there. So we did. We got out clean. We're good to go.
The traffic, the situation we ran into in California was horrendous. And despite having spotters ahead of us and people trying to, you know, give us a hand, you know, there was no moment, as Ed always says, there was a moment where you could have set the cruise control and beat the record in California, but we never had that moment. We never had that moment where, you know, we had these moving targets. We never had the chance to just put our foot down and know that we were going to be the fastest time. We knew we were up there, but we didn't know that we were going to be the fastest time.
The disguise proved to be effective, though, because one of our scouts that led us through Nevada, Right as we get to the California border, we pass him, and he's on the phone with us the whole time. And he's like, guys, watch out. I just got my doors blown off by a cop car heading to California. And we're like, no, we just passed you. He's like, no, there's a cop car just flying south. He's going towards California. You guys better watch out. And this is a car guy, right? He should know better. And we're like, no, that was us. We just passed you. We're that car. He's like, oh, okay.
To me, the run was momentous. Being part of a team that was able to achieve such a feat in such dire circumstances was incredible.
Part of the reason I wanted to do a COVID run was everybody who cannonballs wants to know what it would be like to do the ultimate run. The perfect situation, the perfect car, and the perfect team. I found the perfect co-driver in Arne, and the car was just about as good as it gets. And there was no traffic. And that was just so much fun because on the 27-25 run, we're battling with all of the normal circumstances, the traffic, the left lane drivers, and there was just nobody on the roads. And it was a lot of fun to be able to cruise at 140, 160 miles an hour and not be bothering anybody.
So on Sunday afternoon, we pulled into the Portofino. We had traveled 2,816 miles in 25 hours and 39 minutes with an overall average speed of 110 miles an hour across the whole country. The feeling pulling in, for once we actually had people there. We weren't pulling up in the middle of the night. There were some people there to greet us and to film us coming in. But I gotta say that it just didn't have the same feeling as 27-25. When we had done 27-25, it was more about doing something that that hadn't been done and was possibly couldn't be done. And 25-39, while it cements us as the fastest to ever cross the country, it just didn't feel the same. This run had quite a different feeling than 27-25. For that run, there was really no blueprint, and the record had stood for so long that it had a sense of accomplishment that was far greater than this. For 25-39, everybody knew that this was the time to do it. You had so much less to overcome, so much less traffic, so much fewer cops. So while it's a great achievement, it just doesn't have the same impact to me as 27-25 did.
There is no way that a police department would sell you a full code police car. You can buy anything you would like to on eBay. And for some reason, I went searching for a Crown Victoria. Now, Doug tells stories about Crown Victorias. Arne seems to love Crown Victorias, and Crown Victorias are usually nothing but trouble. But for some reason, we all love them too. So I went shopping for an Indiana sheriff car. And truckers call them Indiana waffle monsters because they are brown and tan, so they look like waffles and syrup. I minded my own business. Now, circa this is about 14 years ago, and came across a 98 Ford Crown Victoria sheriff car. And it still said sheriff real big on the side of it, brown and tan. It was just an online auction bid, and it's county sheriff car, stars, everything, decals, full code police car. What had happened, it was Miami County, Indiana, northern Indiana, and they were going to run it in the demolition derby because it had a 4.6 in it and it had a bit of a knock, and they were just going to beat it to death. But for some reason, they did not run it in the county fair, and the officer that still had it put it up for auction on eBay. And you can still, yes, buy everything you would like, find it on eBay. So I bid, and I was the high bidder on a full code Indiana Waffle Monster sheriff car. About 14 years ago, of course, my daughter at that time, 10, 11 years old, and she loved cameras. And her first tattoo was a 35 millimeter on her foot. I was always more of a best friend than a dad, which sometimes is not the best thing to be. But I took her with me everywhere. I said, Kate, I bought this sheriff car up in northern Indiana. We had truck and trailer. Let's go. And of course, she had a digital camera that day, and she went and did her own thing and kind of just took pictures out the window and everything. We get up there, to this kind of like an impound lot, like a bullpen. And this gentleman's waving me in, come on in. And I back into this lot, and there it is, brown and tan. Decals are still on it. Still says County Sheriff on the back of it. And I'm thinking, man, this cat would have taken the decals off of it before I picked it up. I handed him the loot, time to go. He drives it right up on top of the trailer. I strap it down. Life is good. And he waves me, see you later, goodbye. I get to US 31. He goes north. I go south. I bought a full code Indiana sheriff car on eBay. So I go home and take it off the trailer, and it's knocking to beat. I mean, it's not good. At that point, I'm thinking, man, let's drop a motor in this thing. I bought it. Let's do it. So I bought another Crown Vic, took a motor out, dropped a motor in it, and I'm driving. I've got a full code Indiana sheriff car, and I am out on the town in this thing. There was a lot of things that I didn't know you can get away with in a sheriff car. I didn't realize you get free McDonald's in a sheriff car. I didn't realize you get free car washes in a sheriff car. There's a lot of cool things you get away with in a sheriff car. I had one of those dare to keep your kids off drugs license plate on the back. And I was so bold where the personalized license plate says donut on it. And so I'm whipping around in an Indiana sheriff car, full code, everything down the side, still says sheriff, tinted windows, and a donut license plate, and other sheriffs are like waving at me like, howdy. And I was a club disc jockey back then. I'd drive to the club. I'd drive it everywhere. John Schneider from Dukes of Hazzard, he needed a trip to Metropolis, Illinois, because he was Jonathan Kent on Smallville, Superman's father, drove the sheriff car. When we unveiled the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard down in Georgia, drove the sheriff car down there. When we did the Blues Brothers trip in 2005, one of my friends drove the sheriff car and directed traffic with it in downtown Chicago. I drove that car so often, and in Indiana, police officers can't have goatees. They can't have facial hair. And I'm just whipping around, standard goatee, waving at officers, this, that, and other. At the time, I had a friend that lived up in Crawfordsville, Indiana, and that's 20 miles or so outside of Indianapolis. And I drove him home, and it was cold, snowing, and a mess out. And after I dropped him off, I got on the highway and heading back home. And right on the exit ramp, the old black ice, the old full code Crown Vic, did a couple donuts down the middle of the highway, went behind a guardrail, and then it couldn't get back up on the highway because I was in between Valet and the old Crown Vic sitting there with the headlights pointing out, snow everywhere, buried deep. So Officer Travis here gets out of his car, shuts the door, and I make my way up the kind of the embankment behind the snow, step over the guardrail, and here comes an Indiana state trooper. I'm like, oh man, this couldn't be any worse than it already is. And it's about 2:15 a.m. And he says, "You're a little out of your jurisdiction, aren't you?" And I'm like, buddy, if you only knew I was a little out of my... I was like, yeah, hit a little black ice coming off the exit ramp there, and here's where we're at. And I said, I'm thinking I'm going to go up here to this truck stop, because there's a truck stop at the exit ramp, and see if I can't just get somebody to pull this thing out. Get on in. So Officer Travis gets in with the state trooper. He takes me back to the truck stop, and he says, all right, partner, hey, when you get in there, ask for Tom. He runs the tow truck, and he'll pull you out. Is Tom here? There's Tom. Hey, Crown Vic, the sheriff car. He said, oh, yeah, I heard it come over the radio. Get on in. Took me back to the Crown Vic. It was a bit of a challenge to get it all the way back up the ravine and out. He got it out, fired up the old Crown Vic, and I said, partner, where were we at? He said, sir, you have a good day. And cut me loose. We got away with everything in the sheriff car. So it kind of sat for a little while, and we had a big time with it. One day I needed to drive it somewhere. We were working on the exhaust for the Cannonball Run ambulance or something. I got in the sheriff car because we had driven it everywhere. And little did I know that I had let the plate go expired. And so I'm whipping down through Johnson County, Indiana to the exhaust shop, minding my own business in my sheriff car, and I got pulled over by a real sheriff. And by the time I was out of it and had my hands on the side of it, I had every officer that was on duty that day in Johnson County, including Whiteland and New Whiteland, Indiana, and half of Greenwood, and had me on the side of the car. And they said, of course, I'm impersonating a police officer. I explained to the arresting officer that I had purchased the vehicle this way. And he said, there is no way that a police department would sell you a full code police car. I had the auction printed off and put it in the glove box. And I said, sir, I bought this car this way. This is my car. Of course, it gets towed in and it's gone because it has expired license plates. They did not take me to jail, but they gave me some time that day to prove that I purchased it that way. So I basically went to the police department with the auction that I took out of the glove box. And lo and behold, the arresting officer is already there, beat me there. I had to wait for someone to pick me up. And I said, here's the auction. I bought it this way. He said, Mr. Bell, I've called Miami County, Indiana, and they did not sell you that car that way. Not only that, we called the Ford dealership that they took it to where the motor was determined to be bad. And the Ford dealership also said there was no decals on that car when it came here. So unless you have something else, you'll be hearing from the prosecutor, and we're filing charges for impersonating a police officer. They swore up and down that I re-decaled the car and put a motor in it, and I was cruising around impersonating a police officer. So I went back to the house and I was in some crap. But if you remember, I took my daughter with me that day, and she had a digital camera. And she took a picture of the police officer driving it up on my trailer. So I went home and I printed out all of the photos of the officer that swore up and down he didn't sell it to me that way, and the Ford dealership that swore up and down it had no decals on it, and I was able to prove that I bought it that way. So I went back to New Whiteland, and on the way there, I went ahead and paid for the license plates at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles on the way so I can pick up my car. And I just calmly laid down every photo of this police officer, and it didn't matter what he said. He sold it to me that way. And at that point in time, the officer had nothing he can either A, hold my car on, or B, hold Mr. Bell for. So I got the release and went and got my car out of the impound. And the guys at the impound were just dumbfounded that they would give me my car back. And at the time, the prosecutor in Johnson County, Indiana, wrote me a letter and said, put this in your glove box because you bought it this way. So if you ever get pulled over in it again, hand them this, because I don't want to go through this all over again. So they gave me my car back, proving that the Miami County deputy and officer lied, proving that the Ford dealership up in northern Indiana lied, and I never, ever, ever drove the car again, drove it straight home. Of course, I've talked about Herbie the Love Bug and Cinema Vehicle Services and movie places. The picture car rental people are always looking for police cars. And I had a perfectly good, already decaled up, running and driving Indiana sheriff car. So I called one of my friends that are still in the business, and he purchased the car from me because I had got away with murder. And then there was like a weird Quentin Tarantino movie called Grindhouse, and it had Planet Terror and like Death Proof on it. So if you watch Planet Terror, there is an Indiana sheriff car in Planet Terror that gets blown up. And that was the fate of that police car. Here's where I say something clever, and now you roll the music. I don't know how I orbit around Hazard County, but somehow Travis Bell, for years, was the mecca of the Dukes of Hazzard. During this obsession of the television show and cars flying and things going on, I realized that the first 5 episodes of the Dukes of Hazzard were filmed in Georgia, and you can still visit the sites. It pretty much is all still there, but In the late 90s and early 2000s, it really still looked the same. Because granted, the show had filmed down here in 78. So we would come down from Indianapolis and just bang around and drive General Lee's around and go play the Dukes of Hazzard. And of course, down here, and they're like, hey, it's Bo and Luke. And they're like, hey, nothing to see here. But then we wanted to find the people that worked on the show. And we would actually make these little beautiful flyers with a wanted poster that says, if you were here this day when the car flew, call this number or whatever else. And we put them in little diners, and where the cars flew, there's obviously telephone poles and stuff. We'd take this 20-foot ladder and put this sign up. It says, if you were here on this day, blah, 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 when the car flew. And people would call. They said, yes, they held the school bus up that day just to jump the car down the street. And Mom and Dad were so mad because I was late from school. And they had all these great stories. And then we started finding the people that painted the cars in and around Conyers, Georgia, and Covington and Snailville, Georgia, and all these other places. And then we found the transportation directors, and they were like going, oh, now we got these gold mine people. And we had this fellow's name. His name was Don Schischler. And Don Schischler has won Academy Awards, and he was a director and second unit DP. And he had no reason to be nice to me. I was just some idiot that was obsessed with the Dukes of Hazzard. And I pull into this lot where all these camera cars are, and there's these little bitty short buses, yellow school buses, and a bunch of blue Ford Tauruses. And some had the front end knocked off of them. One had all four wheels off of them. And I was like, what on God's green earth? And he's come out and introduced him. I said, all these? He said, movie Road Trip, Sean, William Scott, whatever. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, these are all the Tauruses from Road Trip. There's the short buses. We got to go crush all these things and get paid for these things. I'm like, this guy's awesome. And I go, tell me about the Dukes of Hazzard. Tell me about all this stuff. And he said, well, December 23rd, 1978, I had 51 totaled vehicles after 5 episodes of the Dukes of Hazzard. And I go, what did you do with them all? He said, there's a transmission recycling shop in Dawsonville, Georgia, and his name is Shaw Recycling. And I called Cliff Shaw 2 days before Christmas, 1978, and he came and picked them all up. I said, all of them? He said, all of them. I'm like, well, when was the last time you talked to Cliff Shaw? He said, the 23rd of December, 1978. And I go, it's time for a family reunion. Like, let's go. So sure enough, as if this guy hasn't been entertaining enough to this idiot that's obsessed with the Dukes of Hazzard, after Don Schischler had driven around all these Wagon Queen family trucksters from National Lampoons, he had this terrible black Suburban with a gun turret on the roof of it. And it was from some terrible, terrible Cindy Crawford, Baldwin brother bad guy movie. And this was the Russians of the bad guy car. But that was his car now. So we all get in the terrorist Suburban and head off toward Dawsonville, Georgia. And he's telling us this story that Cliff Shaw and the Shaw family live in this beautiful part of Dawsonville, Georgia, just down the street from Bill Elliott's shop. But there's a nuclear locomotive buried there. And they're the only ones that live on this street. It's either a nuclear plane or a nuclear locomotive, but it is buried at the end of Lumpkin Campground Road in Dawsonville, Georgia, and there's not very many people that live there because of this thing. And I'm like thinking, where on God's green earth is he taking us to? And he knew right where he lived. So we pull up down this hill or down this country road. I mean, you can imagine it in your mind. And up to the left was this gravel road that went up the hill toward this smaller home, but there was cars everywhere as far as the eye could see, all the way up the hill. And from make and model you can think of, older, but just what mythical junkyards are made of, and just trees growing up through them and everything. We're just looking for any remnants of the Dukes of Hazzard. We bang on the door up there. The lady comes to the door and says, hey, Cliff Shaw, blah, blah, blah. Oh, Cliff's not home from work yet. And hey, Don Schischler. And Don, on the way there, he said, look, I'm going to run traffic for you if they say it's here and you just go walking in their yard to see if you can find this thing. We're talking acres. I decided to chime in and say, hey, we're looking for things from the Dukes of Hazzard of all things. Remember Mr. Schischler here? He was a little family reunion there. And she goes, you looking for the old Dodge Charger car? And I'm like, she could have said a bad guy car. She could have said police car. She could have said Boss Hogg's Cadillac. She could have said anything. But yes, we are looking for the old Dodge Charger car. And she goes, if you walk back down the driveway at the second Pinto, mind you, not the first one, hang a left and start walking in toward the road. And I turned on a video camera, and there was a green 1969 Dodge Charger. And in the first episode of the Dukes of Hazzard, they jumped Lee 1 over Roscoe's police car. And of course, it didn't land well, but the body shop would remove the doors off of it because that kept them from having to paint new 01s on another car. And they remove everything that they can use, but then another episode of the Dukes of Hazzard called for a wrecked race car. So they repainted the first General Lee green and put 71s on it and put John Merende on the roof, which was the transportation coordinator. So I had just found the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard. As I walk around and the door was welded shut on one side and gone on the other side, and it's orange where the door jamb is and the roll cage is still mostly in it. There's a VIN number, which is XP29, blah, 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 any Dodge Charger. And there's a little bitty, label maker. It says LEE1. And then I knew I had found the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard with a Los Angeles parking sticker still on it and all these other things. What do? You are the biggest Dukes of Hazzard moron from any zip code you can come up with. So old Cliff comes home. I heard him drive past me up the driveway, and I'm down there trying to keep my tongue in my mouth going. And this thing is a disaster. It's got more pine needles on it than any national forest you can think of. The motor's in it, the transmission's in it somehow. And it's, still orange where it's supposed to be. It still has a 71. You open up the trunk, and it still has all the concrete in the trunk from when they jumped the car, because it was a big block car, and they jacked it up in the middle of the car. And of course, the nose would be heavy. So they put quickcrete concrete in it until it leveled out. And that's how they made ballast in the back of the car. And that's how they flew the General Lees, and that's why they don't land nose first. So I go walking up the driveway, and I just can't believe, of all things, I expected a bad guy car, cooter truck, anything but the General Lee. I found the first General Lee. So Cliff was interesting. He was a very good old boy, super nice gentleman. I said, hey, Cliff, the old Dodge Charger, the green one down the street. He goes, oh, the General Lee. I'm like, oh, man. When he's thinking it's just some old wrecked race car. He knew it was the General Lee. I'm like, dang. And he goes, oh, the two Roscoe police cars are over the hill. I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. Sure enough, over the hill, past the goats, Roscoe, both police cars, police 1 and 2 sitting there. I come back up, and it was getting a little dark out. And Don had his family reunion with him. He had ran the traffic like he said he was going to for me. And I said, hey, General Lee for sale? Can I take all these out of here? No, the grandson, Cliff's grandson, was into the Dukes of Hazzard. And I'm like going, yeah, but this is it is a mess. And I said, well, all right, no amount of money. And it's, Travis, you have yourself a safe drive home now, whatever. And so I knew his grandson's name, and I knew his address. So I went home and started a little plan on how on God's green earth to get this car. So every 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 months, I would send his grandson something in the mail. Little 3-pack of General Lee cars, Roscoe Cooter, Enos car, whatever else, sent it in the mail. An autographed picture from John Schneider, sent it in the mail. I'd place a call about every 6 months, and I'd say, oh, we sure do appreciate you sending. Zach, sir, loves this, and blase that, and no problem. So after, model kits, and I just put them in the mail. I called his wife one Friday, and I said, hey, did Zach get the Daisy Jeep thing or whatever? And she said, oh, yeah, we sure do appreciate it. He's in there putting it together now, or XYZ. Finally had enough. After about 8-10 months, a year of doing this, it's time to ask if we can buy the car again. And so I said, hey, I sure would like to come down and talk to Cliff about that car. Oh, yeah, if you're ever in the area, you should come on down, stop on by. And that is my green light that someone has approved me to come down there and talk about that car. And so I immediately called friends in South Carolina, and they had a flatbed roll-off truck, and they didn't live far away. And I had another friend in Chicago. I didn't have a trailer at the time, and I said, I don't care what it takes, just get down here. And this was a Friday. And Friday turned into driving all day and night. Saturday, we pull down Lumpkin Campground Road, or where the nuclear locomotive is, and here comes Mr. Shaw down the driveway in an Astro van. And this driveway, of course, is up the hill, and it's gravel, and nothing stops well on gravel. It comes to a stop. And I said, "Hey, Cliff. Hey, June. I'm here to talk to you about this car." And Cliff turned into some guy I didn't know. And yelled at me like I was his child. And I don't work on Sundays. Who told you to come down here? And I said, "Well, June just told me on Friday to come down." And she's like, "Yeah, and he's a very religious man, doesn't work on Sundays, not going to have anything to do with some Yankee down there cruising around his property." And I said, "Well, Cliff, I drove all night, and I really want to talk to you about this car." And he rolled the windows up, and he said, "It's buried back there. You can see what you can do." And that was my green light. He didn't know I had a tow truck around the corner. So we moved a whole bunch of cars, and it was raining, and it was on the hill, and it was not good. And we pulled Lee 1 up on a flatbed with big old railroad ties and got it up there and got it out and parked it there at the bottom of his driveway. And it took hours, but he was at church. I saw him coming back down the road, and I don't know if he's going to tell me to fly a kite, get this thing out of here. What are you doing on my property? And he drove right past us and up the driveway. And I'm like going, "Oh, Mr. Shaw is pissed off." So everybody's looking at me like, "What are you going to do? You got to go talk to him, Travis." I'm like, "Dude, this guy's, all right." So here he comes down, overalls. And he said, "Travis, I apologize for being so ill towards you today. The NASCAR race is on. Why don't you come up here and sit down and watch this with me, and we'll talk about that car." And he must have got some religion at church, felt bad about it. And I was like going, all right. So I'm like, Mr. Shaw's saying, "Let's go watch a NASCAR race." And we get up there, and an outside TV and old box TV and a little picnic table. After watching a couple laps of this race, I was like, "Cliff, I got a heck of a drive home." I said, "I want to talk to you about what I'm going to give you for this car." He said, "Well, what do you offer me for it?" Being the shrewd negotiator that I am, I handed him a pen, and I said, "You write a number on your hand, and I'm going to write a number on my hand. And we're going to turn them over. And whatever we're apart, then we know where we're going to start at." And so I had 3 eyes looking over my shoulder on what I was going to write on my hand. And Mr. Shaw, he didn't even think about it. So I wrote $300 on my hand. He could have told him what $30,000 for the car. I had no idea. He rolled his hand over. I rolled my hand over. He wrote $500 on his hand. So I bought the very first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard for $400. And then he said, "You can have the other police cars for the same money too." So we're talking $1,200 for all of the 3 original police cars from the Dukes of Hazzard. So we took it home. We kept it in its green paint with the 71s, and it was known on the TV show as the Richard Petty wrecked race car. And we kept it like that for a long time. But people started picking paint off of it because they wanted a souvenir from the first General Lee, or picking the roll bar padding. You couldn't take it anywhere because it's painted with lead paint, and Dukes of Hazzard fans letting their kids climb in this thing, and 3 of them's probably dead now from being inside that thing. So it was a mess. It was very, very bad. And I had 4 Dukes collectors from Ohio contact me and said, "Travis, would you sell the first General Lee?" I said, "Everything's for sale. What would you like?" And they made me a good offer. I split the money, true to form, and a man of my word, with my friend from Chicago. He drove a trailer down there and made half. It was no longer my car, and I didn't have to worry about it anymore. Then another gentleman called and said, "Travis, I'm in the market for a General Lee because for some reason the mecca of the Dukes of Hazzard was in Indianapolis, and my name was all over every message board, and I had found the first General Lee, and I was arranging all this stuff." But he wanted a real car. And I said, "Man, there were 17 real General Lees left in the world. They're all in various conditions. They're very expensive. They're very impossible to drive because this is, if you want something to drive and go to your car shows, don't buy it." But he was adamant. About the same time, the guys from Ohio called back and said they'd broken up or whatever, and they want to sell the car again. So I called the gentleman in Florida that wanted a real General Lee, and I said, "Lee 1's for sale." And he said, "Give me the phone number." And he called me back. He said, "I bought it. They'll have it ready for you. I've already wired their money. You just go to Ohio and pick it up." And I go, "I don't want this car back." So He flew in from Florida. I went and picked the car up. We met at the Indianapolis International Airport. He came and saw what he purchased, which wasn't the greatest car in the world. It still looked exactly as it did as I found it in Cliff Shaw's yard. And I said, well, what are you going to do with this thing? He said, well, you're going to restore it. And I said, I have no desire to restore this thing. He said, Travis, if someone painted all over the Mona Lisa, someone would have to fix it, and that someone is you. And I'm like, that's pretty heavy. He took off. His plane ticket was for about 3 hours in Indianapolis to talk me into restoring the first General Lee. This car had fallen out of the sky and landed on asphalt 8,310 days before I found it. The transmission tunnel had caved over the top of itself. It was a disaster, but it still had its transmission, still had its motor, still had a lot of stuff in it. So I started writing checks, and we hired a body shop, found a completely junk but good sheet metal 69 Dodge Charger, saved what we could save off the other one. We actually had the original motor rebuilt, and then we restored Lee 1, but we didn't restore it to showroom condition. We restored it to as it appeared Saturday, November 11th, 1978, when it flew. And the decals were crooked because whoever put the decals on the door that day put them on crooked because they followed the wrong line of the car. And so we went ahead and rebuilt the car, and it ran and it drove, and it still had a cracked windshield, and it had a cracked windshield in the show, and the parking sticker was in it. And we had General Lee number 1 again on the road. The most famous car. It's on every Ertl package of it in the air. It's the only one that had chrome rocker panels for the entire show, and it's there. So we had the car, and we had it for a while. He took it back to Florida for a minute and put it in the DuPont Registry Museum down there, and just really kind of fell out of love with it. So it was time to sell it. He asked if we would represent the car again, which, we have no problem with that, and take it to Barrett-Jackson. And for those of you that have had an experience at Barrett-Jackson, oh boy. And it's going to run up on Saturday on the big night and everything else and whatever else. So my friend Jim went out there to represent the car. And he is, if not equally more knowledgeable about the Dukes of Hazzard than I am. And just a walking encyclopedia. I've learned more from him than I learned from most people that appeared on the show. He's out there representing the car, and I had to DJ. So now, when I say I had to DJ, I worked at a club called Boogie Nights for 9 years. I was a disc jockey for 26. So I have a full afro on, glasses, a Harlem Globetrotters uniform, and it's a Saturday night, and I'm looking at about 1,000 people, and I got this little TV in the DJ booth, and this car is about ready to sell. And he had called me, Jim had called me and said, there's this little guy, well-dressed, nice guy, really interested in this car. And I'm like going, I'll sell it to him, I don't care who he is. It's all we need is 2 people to get a bidding war on this thing. It rolls up on stage and it starts flying, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70,000. And this is a disc jockey and a luthier that had just restored a car, and we're up over $100,000. We have no business restoring cars. We are just Dukes of Hazzard fans. The minute it hit $110,000, it hit a wall. It was done. And they are begging for bids, like, somebody give me $10. Like, it was ridiculous. But there was a bid from the Skybox, and that Skybox was the eventual winner. And the minute he put his card up, everybody stopped. And they all got out of his way, and it was so weird to watch it happen. But I bought the car for $400, so I'm up to $110,000 on my $400 investment. Come to find out, it was Bubba Watson, and he does live in Scottsdale, and he's local, but a super nice guy, PGA golfer, just a terrific, terrific guy. And it couldn't have gone to a better person. A lot of people are like, Travis, aren't you upset this thing only went for whatever, and it was on a rails? I'm a disc jockey. And a disc jockey and a luthier restored the first General Lee, and we're fans, and we just made, the car just sold for $110,000 on my $400 investment. I was dancing in the dance club like the Warner Brothers frog, like I was happy as could be. When the car left and went on, Bubba would email me back and forth just occasionally, and I sent him some videos of when we restored it and shirts and whatever else. But then he would appear on a YouTube channel or another program, and he was able to recite the history of the car. So he was a student of the car, so it couldn't have gone to a better person. And he has since restored some things or done some things to make it his car, because it is now his car, and he is allowed to do anything he wants to with it. So some things I didn't expect was the backlash from the Dukes of Hazzard fans that couldn't believe that I would destroy the first General Lee, that I was going to cut this car all up and rebody it, and it's a replica of the first General Lee, and it's no longer the first car. And I was like going, but it's running and driving on the drivetrain it flew on, and all the sheet metal on it's 1969 sheet metal. So I restored the car, but it's a replica. And so I didn't, and there was just threads and just people pissed off. And I'm like going, oh my gosh. So you remember back in the day, the Statue of Liberty had all the scaffolding all over it. They rebodied the whole Statue of Liberty, but they still call it the Statue of Liberty. So even if you restore it, it's still the same thing. We just destroyed Hollywood history, but it was my $400 investment, and they could have bought it for the same amount of money if they would have found it.
So I've been a gearhead, a car guy, a motorcycle guy my entire life, but I really love trucks. And my absolute favorite truck in the entire world is the one that I currently drive, the one I plan to keep forever, and that is my 2006 Dodge Ram Overlander. Now, my love for this particular truck started in 1999 when Dodge at the Detroit International Motor Show unveiled the Dodge Power Wagon concept truck. And this truck was just the coolest thing I had ever seen. It was this modern stylistic interpretation of the old 1930s and 40s power wagons that you'd seen as like command cars in World War II, you know, with the big narrow grille and the big fenders with the headlights out on the fenders. And this was like a modern version of that, but it had this sleek windshield and a big diesel in it, big tires. And I just thought it was the coolest looking thing ever. And during that time, you know, Dodge was known, you know, they'd taken the Prowler from a concept vehicle, they made that. They'd come out with the Viper, they made that. So I was like, when can I get my hands on this truck? Well, they were never going to make it. Closest I ever got was this little Hot Wheels I set on my desk. It was the same truck, but it was actually black. But then in 2006, when the third generation Ram facelift came out, suddenly this was the truck I'd been waiting on. It was close. It had the narrow grille, these big fenders with the headlights kind of wrapping up onto the fenders. And I looked at it and I thought, man, you know, if I could just get like some big fender flares and that big bumper and the winch, like that truck, some lift and big tires, that truck is going to be as close as I'm ever to get to this concept truck. You know, at that time too, I was shutting down my overlanding company. I was rock crawling the diesel Scout I have. I was road racing sport bikes. I was drag racing a hot rod Hemi Dodge Magnum. I was doing track days with a buddy of mine in a BMW. I was racing dirt bike. I was just had too many irons in the fire. So I started looking, and again, it took me a couple of years to kind of put some of my projects aside, and I really started looking in earnest. And the 2006 through 2008 had this body style, but the 06 was really the holy grail. It was the first year of the big limo-like mega cab, but it was the last year of the old school 5.9 Cummins diesel, which is just a fantastic motor. So I started looking for these trucks, and you know, I'm very rapidly finding two ends of the spectrum. Either it is some work truck that looks like a building has collapsed on it. On the high end of the price range, I was finding these, you know, every optioned out, showroom perfect, clean version that some urban cowboy wanted way too much money for. So in a page that Ed would write later, I started looking for things like damage or salvage or repair. And, you know, I'm a pretty good mechanic, and I figure I can fix pretty much anything that might be wrong with it. So that rabbit hole started leading me finding all sorts of other trucks. It would either be a truck that said slight frame damage that looked like it had been dropped out of an airplane, or it would say, you know, needs interior, but it had been completely torched. There were a couple of good solid diesel four-wheel drives went through, but I either got outbid or just missed them. But my search through the dark side of used vehicles led me to some of the DEA, like federal law enforcement auctions, like where they would bust a drug dealer or some guy owed a bunch of taxes or something. So I started looking through these sites, and I found one, and there it was. It was 2006, 3500 four-wheel drive mega cab. It was the single tracks, even though it would normally have been a dually. It just had one set of wheels in the back. The big diesel. It already had the bumpers on it. It had the fender flares. It had like everything I wanted, and it was black. It was like the closest thing to that little Hot Wheel car, and I had to have it. Called the guys immediately, and they were pretty cool. They just said, yeah, we get these things from DEA auctions, ATF, any kind of a seizure. And, if there's a truck you want, send a $500 deposit. We'll secure the truck. You can come down and look at it. If there's anything wrong with it, you can keep half your deposit. Like, okay, well, I'm looking at the price, and, this price was pretty low for a truck of this time. It was about half of what the market was going for. And, it looked okay in the pictures. So I asked the guy, I said, well, why is the price as it is? Is it damaged? Is there some sort of mechanical issue? And he said, well, they're hard trucks to move because a lot of people are a little weary of their possibly criminal past. He said a lot of times they've been sitting in an impound lot for a long time. The radios are missing. There's some kind of weird damage to them sometimes. But, this truck's solid. It's in good shape. And again, if you don't like it, you can get half your deposit back. And I immediately knew that if I let this one go, I was going to regret it. So I wired him the money. I rented a car and I drove to Houston. And the address they gave me was this warehouse, just this sort of unmarked warehouse. And everything is just this washed out, overexposed 70s, just kind of hazy, light, bleached out white, except that truck. It was next to the building behind like a 12-foot chain link fence, like some sort of caged animal. And this truck was just sitting there, and the truck was black. It had limo tinted windows. They were black. The emblems were black. It had black projector lights on it. It had big black bumpers. It had black aftermarket wheels. And it wasn't like that chalky flat black. It was this inky, like light just disappeared into it. This truck looked menacing in the daylight. And I saw it and I knew that even this may have been murdered in this truck, like I was going home in this truck. So I knock on the door. But a very bouncy, very exuberant guy pops up, named Skip or something, pops up. Hey, you're here for the truck? Great, well, here it is. So, he takes me out back and like stepping into this little fenced in area with this truck. It was like, I was excited even then. It was like getting into a cage with this thing. It was just sitting there and it was just the most sinister looking truck. And I was just so excited. And, and I walk over to it and I look inside and, from the outside looked okay. The inside looked all right, except there was a little bit of damage to the inside. The seat bolster on the driver's seat was like broken and the visor was torn down and there was like the radio had been kicked in and it looked like there'd been some sort of wrestling match had happened inside the truck. And it was otherwise clean though. They'd wiped it out pretty well. It looks like somebody had sat in the passenger seat, maybe shaken up a Dr. Pepper. There was like water stains all over the headliner and the carpet was all stained and there was some kind of they'd wiped the door panel and the dash down, but there's some little cracks that just had some stain and stuff in it. And I'm thinking, okay, just somebody spilled a drink or something. So I'm about to get out and look under the hood, and the guy produces a key. And, it was the typical Dodge key fob, but it had this motel key hanging on it. It was a motel that had the address scratched out, and it was just on the keychain. Okay, that's a little weird, but nonetheless, the salesman actually didn't even want to go on the test drive with me. He just said, hey, look, I'm going to get the paperwork together. You go take it for a spin. Drove it out to the road, and this is one of those big Texas highways with the turn lane in the middle and 2 lanes on either side, big wide group. And so I saw my gap, and I put my foot in it, and immediately this truck just took off. Like, as soon as I started turning out across the road, I'm making a left turn. I could feel the rear end stepping out. I just kind of turned into it, and it just made the most gorgeous, just power slide across all 5 lanes. Just sort of held the drift for a second, and as I leaned off the gas, it just straightened up beautifully. So I'm just sailing on the highway and just loving every second of it. I see an exit coming up, so I get off and kind of get off the exit and turn. I go under the overpass and I'm sitting there for a second and, just kind of listen to it. There's nothing in the road in front of me. It's just a big, long, straight Texas road. And, I put it in 4-wheel drive and, put my left foot on the brake and kind of do the, country boy launch control, just kind of build the boost up a little bit. And, it's in 4-wheel drive and the Second I let off the brake and gave the gas, it just snapped my head back. That truck took off with just this amazing roar and rumble. Just, oh my God, this acceleration, oh, and but I mean, I've drag raced a lot of cars. This thing was fast. I switch it out of 4-wheel drive at about 65 miles an hour. It's going. I bury the speedometer at 120. I look at my GPS, it says 138. The truck is starting to rise up. You had these big, like 14-inch wide tires, which that kind of centrifugal force, they become cones. And I could feel the truck actually like gaining height. It was riding up on the tires. Oh my God. So I slow it down and it wiggles a little bit. And I'm just like, oh my God, what do I have here? And I turn it around. I get back to the same underpass and I stop the truck and I get out before I get back to this office and I open the hood and it was like in Pulp Fiction when they open the briefcase, there's that glow. I mean, it was just this giant air cleaner the size of a desk trash can and this big shiny crossover pipe and wrapped fuel lines and like 2 fuel lines feeding it, and I could see the head and like there's gasket material on it. The head's been off. Presumably it's got pistons, valve springs, who knows what else in it. Like all the way back, I'm just thinking like, oh my God, like they're going to find out like what's under the hood of this thing. They're going to back out of this deal. I'm already thinking like I'm driving really safely. I don't want somebody to like wreck it before I can sign the title. Like I almost got this like I'm a shoplifter. Like I just got to get out somehow of this truck. I get back and then the guy was just very nonchalant, hey, how'd it drive? And I'm trying to be all cool. I'm like, it drives okay. It sounds good. He's like, yeah, I think it's got a chip in it for fuel mileage or something. I think it needs a new muffler though. And I look up underneath it. It looked like 3 big mufflers welded end to end that were all wrapped in some kind of crazy insulation or something. I'm like, that's weird, but okay, heat exchange or something. There were some weird little lights on the front bumper I couldn't find a switch for. I follow the wire back and it goes to wherever the component that had been screwed to the console was. And I started looking at them and they were like the 24-volt infrared lights that would normally be on like a Striker or a Hummer or something. And I was like, man, this is cool. The drug smugglers must have like been using like night vision goggles or something. And there was a little like a spring-loaded interrupt switch. And what I pretty much discovered was that all the interior lights had been pried out of the truck. The fuses for every one of the lights, for the dash, for every light on the truck, the horn had been cut. Everything on this truck that could possibly make a sound or any light had been cut. And they were pretty much just using this little infrared lights. And, with the truck being all blacked out and this big long muffler thing on the back, I'm thinking this wasn't like the smuggler where you got the hidden compartment in the trunk. This was like they were just straight up driving over the border in the dark, getting whatever they were doing, coming back and just running full stealth mode. And I guess with this hot rod motor and the bumpers, they were just going to run it or ram it. So we're doing the paperwork and I asked the guy, about the history of the truck. And, of course he's like, well, I don't really have any actual information. He said, but I do know it has not been registered in almost 3 years. There's no insurance claims or anything. I'd run the VIN number on it already. It hadn't been totaled or wrecked or anything. It had just been not registered. I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. He did tell me it had been seized in Laredo, Texas, which is right on the Mexican border. And DEA had it for about a year. And then they had flipped it to the auction where they had obtained it. So I'm like, okay. I said, was it like some kind of undercover thing or something? He said, well, it's hard to tell, but with the title, usually, yes, they may do that if they seize a truck, but then decide to use it like for their own undercover stuff. When they're done with it, they just wash the title. That way the next owner isn't in any way associated with whatever badness might have gone on. I'm like, okay, whatever. At this point, he could have told me there's a dead body in the back. As long as I got to take that engine home with me, it was great. So I get the truck, it was a good time of my life. I was able to pay cash for it, just paid him cash, hit the road with the truck. So I proceed to get the truck fixed. I pull the crazy exhaust pipe off, put a 5-inch exhaust all the way out of the back. That truck dynoed at 698 horsepower and 1,158 foot-pounds of torque. It was just a riot to drive. It was, as I said before, a big vehicle like that, when you go sliding it around a clover leaf or power sliding it onto some street, the weight of the truck just pulls the tires along. So it was the easiest thing to control. I'd get off on an exit ramp and just tap the gas and sling the rear end out and just, one hand on the wheel. I drove that truck through the side windows as much as I did the front. I just treated it like I was in some Gymkhana video for like 2 years. Just had such a great time with it. I raced it. It turned 12s at the quarter mile in Commerce. I spun the tires every chance I get. Of course, I was going through a $2,000 set of tires about every 10 months, but I did not care because it was so much fun. But, as they say, the candle that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and all good things come to an end. The engine started making some bad noises. The transmission started shifting kind of funny. And, you know, I looked around to some people who could do performance diesel, and I found a really, really great shop, Garmin's Diesel Performance down in Griffin, Georgia. And they just knew that engine backwards and forwards, and they were really talented guys. And they went through it, and they said, well, we're going to need an entire new drivetrain. That was just way out of my budget. But again, with a fantastic stroke of luck, the guys there had seen some of my sculptures out of car parts. And the shop guys there said, hey, we want to give Jeff a really great Christmas present from the shop. And he's a guitar player. Do you think you could make a guitar out of some of these parts from your engine and some of these other trucks and transmissions? And I was like, yeah. Never built a guitar before. I don't play guitar, but I'm not going to pass up a chance like this. So I said yes. So I left the truck with them, scooped up as many parts I could fit in the car, and took them back and started cobbling together this guitar. And I went to a pawn shop, bought a playable, bought a 6-string electric, just kind of cut out the playable bit and started building this elaborate, body around it. And I used lots of gears and I wanted to capture the mechanical nature of their engine shop and their transmission shop. And it came together really well. And I went away with the most fantastic hand-built Cummins diesel engine by these guys. So even though the engine is all sorted out in this truck now, the electrical sorted out, everything works, everything is new. We've done axles, we've done transmission, we've done the engine, everything is great. But the sort of nefarious history of this truck still kind of intrigued me. Now, I had fixed all the wiring, I had rewired it all, got rid of the infrared lights, but I was just trying to figure out like what happened inside this truck. I had since replaced the radio where it had gotten kicked, but the seat is still, to this day, the seat is still bent back. The visor, like what happened in this truck? And so I was over there cleaning it one day, and I was just still kind of getting in the nooks and crannies. I was over in that side with the carpets all stained and the stains in the door panel, and I'm cleaning them. I've got just some alcohol with a Q-tip, and I'm kind of cleaning them out. And a buddy of mine's over there, and he's looking at it, and he was like, hold on a second. He's a hunter, and he goes out to his truck, and he comes back with one of those like blue, like the blood tracker lights, which really only work with like fresh blood, but he shines it, and the just kind of Dr. Pepper looking stuff was just jet black under the light. And he said, dude, that's blood. I got it all cleaned up, but I started thinking like, my God, did somebody get killed in this truck? From 2011 to 2006, that truck is just a ghost. It wasn't registered anywhere. I can't find a title on it. So whatever happened with the DEA with this truck, I don't know if they seized it from somebody and then they used it. Did something go bad when it was the good guy's truck? Did it just go bad when it was the bad guy's truck and they kept it? I don't know. So fast forward another couple of months, and I'm helping a buddy of mine. He was moving. He had a bunch of old Range Rovers and Land Rovers that he was restoring and working on. And I was already there, and a guy kind of showed up late. And as he walks up, he said, man, whose black truck is that? And I said, oh, it's mine. He said, man, if we were back in Texas, I would swear you were the drug smuggler my sister used to date. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's pretty crazy. And I kept my mouth shut just in case he still knew this drug smuggler. So again, I don't know what the history of this truck was, but it's definitely had a very dark past. However, I have tried to give it a brighter future. I've been building this truck into the ultimate overlanding truck since. I have built a custom roof rack for it. I've put my roof tent up top. I've got all my camping gear. I built a red bed in the back for dual spares, all my tools. I put a lift kit on it, bigger tires, added the winch. I've put 360-degree lights around it and an awning, a snorkel, limb risers, all the great stuff. I take it to Caffeine and Octane here in Atlanta. I want to take this truck eventually and drive it from Tierra del Fuego to Prudhoe Bay. I want to do some big Alaska trips with it. I've done some great road trips, and I've been building this truck for that. It is the ultimate overland truck to me that I can build. It's been a great truck. I've met so many people at gas stations and just random people who want to come look at it that have now become great friends of mine. And I plan on keeping this truck forever, despite its nefarious drug smuggling past.
Some amazing stories from a very interesting year. So let's count down to 2021. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. Thank you guys so much for supporting VINwiki in 2020. It's been a wild, wild ride, but we couldn't be any more appreciative of all the viewership, of all the support, for watching, sharing, subscribing, all the things that you do to support VINwiki. We also have to thank AutoTempest. They've been our sponsor for the month of December, which it is no longer, but we're still eternally grateful for their support of VINwiki and of Car Trek. Be sure to check out the Car Trek Christmas special if you haven't done that already, and click the link in the description below to get to AutoTempest.com. AutoTempest.com, all the cars, one search. They truly are the most powerful and the smartest way to shop for your next car. So be sure to check them out and thank them for their continued support of VINwiki and Car Trek. Happy New Year, everyone.